Catelyn Stark knew only darkness for a long while. In the depths of that endless black, she remembered everything and nothing. She felt the red wedding countless times, a haunting echo of steel upon bone, the weight of her final breath rasping in her throat, the ghostly screams of her son Robb fading out as his blood drenched the stones of the twins. She felt the claws of regret rake across her soul, guilt for every choice she had made or failed to make, every motherly caution that had kept her from trusting when perhaps she should have. Yet memory was only a crooked reflection of reality, shaped by sorrow and death. The more she drifted in that cold limbo, the more fragmented her recollections became. Then pain returned, violent, scorching, and punishing. It brought her back to a sense of body, an aching collection of bones and sinews that struggled to be whole again. She would have screamed had her throat allowed it, but she was too far gone for that. Something gritty coated her tongue. She tasted dust and dried blood. Slowly, as though from a great distance, sensation seeped into her stiff limbs. It felt as if her fingers were clenched so tightly that her nails cut into her palms. She tried to open her eyes, and for an agonizing moment, she could not remember if she had ever possessed eyes at all. But when her lids finally parted, she saw the flicker of a torch. It danced upon rough-cut stone walls, illuminating a small cavern. There were shapes around her, cloaked forms, haggard faces. She heard the muttered prayers of men and women who gathered in a half-circle. The clangor of steel on stone rang faintly in the distance, as if a secret war was being waged just outside. The air smelled of damp earth, old rot, and candle wax. Something alive burned within that stale aroma, something tangy and potent that she recognized as the perfume of magic. Foreign tongues chanted words her mind could not grasp, but every syllable pulsated through her veins like a drumbeat. Her body jerked as a wave of agony throbbed through her chest. She pressed her left hand to her heart, or tried to, though her arm felt useless as a dead branch. The chanting grew louder, a cacophony of hushed demands coaxing her spirit to anchor itself in the mortal realm. The flicker of the torch seemed to expand, flaring into a bright orange glow that devoured the corners of her vision. Someone placed a warm palm on her brow, and the contact steadied her. She did not know whose hand it was, but she felt compassion there, or at least a semblance of pity, and she clung to that slender mercy. A memory of the last time she had felt pity struck her. She had pitied Jon Snow, the boy she had never called son, the one she had prayed would go away. She had pitied him, yes, though not enough to break her own boundaries, not enough to show him motherly affection. Now, thinking of him, she felt a stab of shame. Death had a way of sifting through a soul's illusions until all that remained was the unvarnished truth. In death, she had come face to face with her regrets, and they were manifold. Catelyn swam on that wave of anguish as another voice intruded, thick and rasping. Mother, it said, or maybe she imagined it. Whether real or a hallucination, the word tugged at her. She tried to speak in return, but her tongue was thick and lifeless. She coughed, and the taste of copper filled her mouth. Let her breathe, commanded a man's voice, crisp with authority. Silence replaced the chanting, and for a moment the tension eased. Then, at last, Catelyn Stark inhaled in a ragged gasp. Everything came at her in a rush, images from her previous life, Winterfell's arches drenched in morning frost, Ned Stark's solemn face that sometimes broke into the gentlest of smiles, the ghostly prickle of the godwood wind on her cheeks. The warmth of her children gathered around her. They flooded her with longing, and she nearly wept at the sensation. But tears would not come easily. Her eyes felt dry, a desert scoured by grief. She sensed that she was newly whole but still broken in ways no magic could mend. The outlines of the cloaked figures began to sharpen. She saw a man with a ruddy complexion and a close-cropped beard, his eyes bloodshot. A woman whose hair hung lank over her shoulders, face lined with old sorrow. This group did not seem like fanatics or high lords. They seemed like battered survivors, scavengers of tragedy clinging to some last shred of hope. The one holding her hand was a younger man, scarred across his cheek, dressed in leather and battered mail. He looked at her as if she were a specter he both revered and feared. She wondered if they were the Brotherhood without banners that she had heard rumors about, those who once followed Lord Beric Dondarrion, resurrected time and again by Thuras of Mir's Red God. But there was no Myrish accent here, no bright flames dancing from a red priest's sword. Perhaps it was a different band of desperate folk. Or perhaps the rumors had never captured the truth. It no longer mattered. She was here, torn from the silent realm of the dead. Lady Stark, the man with the short beard, said softly, and she felt his breath on her face. "Do you remember us?" His voice was gentle but insistent. She shook her head, an awkward, graceless motion that set her neck ablaze with pain. She tried to form words, but her throat resisted. Instead, she coughed again, more violently, and something like a clot or a mass of congealed blood spattered onto the stone floor. The young man's face twisted in pity as he reached to support her. She wanted to recoil. To be pitied by strangers was too raw, too shameful. But she had no strength to push him away. When she managed to look around again, she saw that the cloaked group parted, allowing someone else to step forward. It was a woman with red-brown hair that bore a faded coppery hue. Catelyn's bleary eyes struggled to place her, but something about her tall frame and guarded expression was familiar. The woman knelt, reached forward, and touched Catelyn's shoulder. "We are your friends," she said gently. "We have waited for you a long time." Friends? Catelyn almost laughed at the absurdity. She had been killed by people she thought were allies, slaughtered at a wedding that was supposed to unite houses, all under the illusion of trust. The memory of Walder Frey's hateful, mocking eyes ignited a rage in her stomach, a fresh wave of bitterness that cut deeper than any blade. If these people before her were truly friends, then perhaps that word had some meaning left in this broken world. Time blurred again. She drifted in and out of consciousness. She felt hands lifting her, watery footsteps echoing through a winding tunnel. When she regained her senses, she was on a pallet in a different chamber, an alcove with straw and blankets. Someone fed her broth, thin, salty, tasting of onion and root vegetables. It hurt to swallow, but she forced it down, realizing her body needed every bit of nourishment. Her voice, still raw, rasped in a hoarse whisper. She tried to say, "Where am I?" though it came out as a single strangled croak. The man with the ruddy complexion answered, "A hideout in the Riverlands. This was once a mine for iron, but it's been abandoned for years. We took refuge here, away from prying eyes." She let her gaze wander across the makeshift camp. Tattered bedrolls, racks of crossbows, a small campfire. There were men and women living in these caves, huddled around. Some barely lifted their heads from their tasks, while others stared at her with a mixture of awe and caution. A half-familiar face or two stirred the corners of her memory, but she could not place them. Her mind was still too addled. The only thing that felt certain was that she was alive, and that knowledge stunned her more profoundly than any dream of the afterlife. "Why?" she croaked. "Why bring you back?" The question seemed to hang in the air. The bearded man exchanged glances with the younger one, as though trying to divine how best to explain. "Because you were Catelyn Stark," he said slowly. "Because we still need you. The Riverlands need you." The Riverlands. It was a place dear to her heart once, the land where she'd grown up as Catelyn Tully. Memories of Riverrun washed through her, a fortress perched over a fork of the river, the gentle hum of water that had lulled her to sleep in childhood. She remembered the fish banners snapping in the wind and her father, Hoster Tully, gazing over the battlements with pride. And now it was presumably under Frey occupation or worse. She had heard, in her final days, that Riverrun had fallen to the Lions or the Freys. The Tully name, she thought, might have been extinguished if not for Edmure, and he was a prisoner or captive somewhere. The notion of her house's downfall made her chest tighten. Another voice piped up from a corner. "You'll help us reclaim our homeland, my lady." It was a thin man, missing part of one ear. His eyes shone with fervent hope. "We are but a few, but with you we can rally the small folk. We can teach the Freys a lesson." Frey. The name shot through her like an arrow. In that moment, she remembered the sound of the crossbows, the wet impact of bolts punching into flesh. Her nails dug into the straw beneath her, and a tremor went through her body. Rage, humiliation, heartbreak. She saw the image of Robb again, kneeling, his spirit already half gone, as her pleas went unanswered. She tasted the sting of tears, but none came. Instead, a bleak emptiness yawned within her. The memory was too big for tears. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. Nothing would be the same again, that much was clear. She was a ghost among the living. And yet, if she truly had a purpose, if that purpose was to restore some semblance of honor to her family's name and to avenge the butchery that had been inflicted upon them, should she not seize it? Her throat bobbed as she struggled to speak. The question that formed was one she didn't even know she wanted to ask until it tumbled out. "My children. Do you know of them?" Silence greeted her. The men exchanged uneasy glances. The woman with red-brown hair looked away. At last, the older man said, "Lady Stark, we know little. Sansa Stark is said to be captive in the capital, betrothed or maybe even wed to it." Catelyn's heart lurched at the mention of Sansa trapped among the vipers of King's Landing. Her mind conjured an image of her second daughter, sweet and trusting, forced to watch the heads of her father and the men she knew displayed on pikes. Sansa was alone there, no doubt. Helpless. Catelyn's stomach twisted. As for Arya, there are rumors she's alive, but none can say where for certain. Some claim she was taken north, others say the Hound had her, but we can't confirm any of it. He paused, searching Catelyn's face. Bran and Rickon, we heard the worst, that they... She closed her eyes, unable to bear the possibility. She had heard that the two youngest boys were murdered by Theon Greyjoy, but those were stories from the time before her death. She could not bring herself to ask for confirmation. The pain was too raw. And Robb, the man continued, but choked. He did not need to finish the sentence. She knew exactly what had befallen Robb. She had seen it, lived it, died with him in that moment. The weight of it threatened to crush her anew. She tried to gather the strength to speak. We cannot save the dead, she said, her voice sounding more certain than she felt. But perhaps we can still save the living. The words made her cringe inside. She was not even sure she believed them. Yet the flicker of hope in the eyes of those around her suggested that even a hollow vow might be enough to keep them fighting for another day. So began her slow recovery. Days passed in that hidden cave. The group called themselves the Riverrun, a ragged alliance of men and women once loyal to House Tully or House Stark, now hounded by Frey patrols and Lannister outriders. Their leaders were a handful of seasoned fighters who had survived the slaughter at the Twins by sheer luck or cunning, or who had deserted the Freys once they realized the monstrous nature of the Red Wedding. Some were small folk whose villages had been ravaged by one army or another. They were half-starved in morale and provisions alike, but resolute in their desire to fight back. Catelyn learned the names of a few: Jorgen, the bearded man who had spoken first; Celia, the quiet, red-brown-haired woman who had taken a vow of vengeance against the Freys for killing her husband, Martin; the scarred young man who had once served as a squire at Riverrun; and Edric, the old soldier who had known her father. Others came and went, scouting or foraging for food. All treated her with a reverence that made her uneasy. Sometimes she caught them staring at her when she slept, as if trying to glimpse whether she still breathed. She did not blame them. She had been dead, after all, and was now returned to them by the darkest sorceries. At times, her body felt alien, her movements stiff, her sensations dulled. Her throat bore scars she dared not examine too closely, for fear she would remember the blade that cut her. Her face was still ravaged from that night, though a mixture of poultices and salves had begun to heal the worst of it. She suspected she would never look the same. In quiet moments, when she lay alone, she wondered if she would have been better off left in her watery grave. But she had children who might yet live, a brother who was rumored to be a prisoner. And she had enemies who needed to pay. Pain became her companion. Each day, she forced herself to stand a little longer, to walk a few more steps. Celia helped her dress in a simple tunic and breeches, far from the gowns she had once worn as Lady of Winterfell or Lady of Riverrun. But they were practical, easier to move in. Martin offered to show her how to wield a short sword. Though she was no stranger to the feel of a blade, she had rarely used one in earnest. She was a lady, once reliant on guards and knights. Now that life was gone. Time in the cave lost meaning. She slept little. Nightmares dogged her, nightmares of the Red Wedding, of Ned's headless corpse, of her children drifting away from her in the swirling waters of the Trident. Sometimes she woke in a fit, her nails tearing at her throat. Celia would calm her with a hand on her arm, whispering that she was safe, that the Freys could not reach her here. But Catelyn knew safety was an illusion. Every day their scouts brought news of Lannister outriders combing the hills or Frey men setting up new checkpoints along the roads. After a week, though she could not be sure of the time, she called for a council of sorts. The Riverborn gathered in the largest cavern. There were 30 of them, perhaps, with more out on errands. They formed a ring around her, expectant. Jorgen stood by her side, arms folded. Celia fidgeted with the hilt of her dagger, while Martin lingered at the edge of the torchlight, anxious but attentive. Catelyn's voice was stronger than it had been, though still husky. "I am Catelyn Tully of Riverrun," she began, ignoring the dryness in her throat. "I was Lady Stark, wife to Ned Stark, mother to Robb Stark, your king in the north. I have returned from the darkness, called by your prayers and your faith. Now I ask you, why bring me back if not to lead you?" Murmurs rustled through the group. Some bowed their heads, others watched her intently. Catelyn stepped forward, letting her gaze touch each face. "We cannot remain in this cave forever. If you want to fight for the Riverlands, if you wish to avenge House Tully and House Stark, then we must do more than hide. We must strike at the Freys, at the Lannisters, at those who have wronged us. We must show the small folk that they have not been abandoned." Jorgen cleared his throat. "Aye, my lady, we want that. But we are few, and your condition might frighten some." She smiled grimly. "You mean the fact that I was dead?" The hush in the cavern was thick enough to feel. There are worse things in this world than a woman returned to finish what was started. Let them be frightened. Let them see that not even death can stop the vengeance of the North. "And the Riverlands," she added, remembering her own roots. A subtle ripple of approval passed among them. Edric, the old soldier, leaned on a spear. "What would you have us do first?" She thought of Riverrun, her father's seat, now in the hands of betrayers. Images of the fortress's walls and towers filled her with both longing and fury. "We begin by gathering allies," she said. "My father's bannermen, those who still remember their oaths. And we help the small folk along the way, wherever they suffer at Frey or Lannister hands. Each farm we protect, each village we save, that is another set of arms we can call upon. We cannot take Riverrun alone, not yet. But we can plant the seeds of rebellion." Some nodded, though hesitation still clung to the air. She let that moment of doubt hang. Then she continued, "The Freys think themselves above justice after they broke sacred guest right. They think the Tullus are finished. Let us show them how wrong they are." It was enough to spark a fire in the eyes of those gathered. They began discussing routes and safe houses, whispering names of lesser lords who might still side with House Tully. Jorgen proposed moving by night along the hills, avoiding the main roads. A few argued over whether to strike out immediately or wait for more men to return. In the end, they decided to dispatch scouts to neighboring villages and to certain minor lords known for their loyalty to the Tully name. Meanwhile, Catelyn and a small contingent would move northward towards some rumored band of outlaws sympathetic to them. That night, she dreamed again of the Red Wedding, but this time there was a difference. In her dream, the torches in the Frey Hall flickered in eerie blue and the hall was silent despite the horror unfolding. She watched as arrows riddled Robb's body, but he did not fall. He turned to her, mouth twisting in sorrow as though he wanted to speak. She tried to run to him, but her feet were rooted to the floor and all she could manage was to sob. Then from behind Robb, a shape emerged, something with the face of a wolf and the eyes of an old man. It pointed at her, silently, and the entire hall erupted into swirling shadows. She woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering. In the following days, the Riverborn made their preparations. They had a dozen horses between them, mostly ploughmares or half-starved nags. They distributed what little food they had, filled water skins from the subterranean stream that ran beneath the cave, and loaded packs with arrows, meager rations, and improvised weapons. Catelyn insisted on carrying a short sword at her waist and a small dagger in her boot. The first time she had tried to lift a blade, her hands had trembled, but she forced herself to overcome it. She had no illusions of being a master warrior, yet she would not rely solely on others to fight her battles anymore. At dusk on the designated day, they slipped out of the cave entrance, hidden behind a rocky outcrop. The sky overhead was awash of deep purples and grays, the air tinged with the scent of damp leaves. Catelyn rode on horseback behind Martin, her back still fragile from the wounds of rebirth. They would travel under the cover of darkness, avoiding main roads whenever possible. As they set out, Catelyn felt a strange mixture of dread and exhilaration. She was going home to the land of her birth, though she knew it would not welcome her with open arms. The Riverlands had become a battlefield, a place of birth. Ned villages and roving sellswords. Yet she could not deny the faint stirring in her chest at the thought of seeing Riverrun's towers again. Even from a distance. Their progress was slow. The woods were thick and the ground uneven. Torches would only attract unwanted attention, so they relied on moonlight. Occasionally, one of the scouts would pause, raise a hand, and everyone would freeze, listening for the telltale sounds of patrols or the crunch of boots on leaves. Twice, they heard movement. Once the clop of hooves on a nearby path. Once the rustle of men speaking in hushed voices. Each time, they moved carefully around the threat, hearts pounding. Eventually, they reached a small clearing by a narrow brook. Catelyn dismounted shakily, wincing as pain flared along her limbs. They made a cold camp, no fire, just bedrolls on the damp ground. The night air chilled her, and she pulled her cloak tighter, thinking of the stone walls of Winterfell and the warm hearths that once felt so secure. She banished the memory. She could not let sentiment weaken her now. Though most of the company huddled to sleep in scattered groups, Catelyn found herself unable to rest. She walked to the brook's edge, crouching down to let the water run over her fingers. It was startlingly cold and clear, reminding her of the rivers that surrounded Riverrun. She gazed at her reflection, dimly illuminated by moonlight. Her face was gaunt, scarred at the throat, eyes shadowed by exhaustion. She tried to see traces of the woman she once was, the proud lady, the careful mother. In truth, she looked more a wraith than a lady. "You should rest," came a voice from behind her. It was Celia. The woman stepped up quietly, arms folded against the chill. "I know," Catelyn whispered, "but rest doesn't come easy." Celia nodded. "Same for me these days. When I close my eyes, I see my husband's face. I see the crossbow bolt that took him." She let out a shaky breath. "Some nights I wonder if this is all a dream, if I'm already dead." Catelyn turned to her. In the moonlight, she could see the lines of sorrow etched into Celia's face. She reached out and clasped the other woman's hand. Celia's grip was cold, but steady. They stayed like that for a moment, two women bound by grief, forging an unspoken bond in the silent darkness. "We are not dead," Catelyn said, her voice breaking slightly. "We are here, breathing, hurting, and while we live, we can still shape the world. Even if it is just a small corner of it, even if it's only long enough to give others hope." A tear slipped down Celia's cheek, shining in the moon's glow. She wiped it away, nodding. "Then we'll keep going," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We'll keep fighting." Catelyn held her gaze. "Yes, we will." They parted quietly, returning to their respective places in the makeshift camp. Catelyn managed a few hours of fitful dozing, her mind swirling with half-formed nightmares. At the crack of dawn, the Riverborn were on the move again, continuing through the thick woodlands. Their aim was a small hamlet rumored to be under Frey extortion. Perhaps they could deliver some form of justice there and rally the smallfolk to their cause. By midday, they emerged from the cover of the trees onto a gentle slope overlooking the hamlet. Thin wisps of smoke rose from a cluster of thatched roofs. Farmlands stretched out on either side, though much of it looked untended and sparse, signs of war's toll. Jurgen, Martin, and Celia scouted ahead. Catelyn stayed back with a few others, peering from behind a low ridge. Her heart thumped in her chest. She realized this would be her first encounter with civilian folk since her resurrection. How would they react? She saw a pair of riders at the edge of the hamlet, men wearing half-rusted mail, their cloaks tattered. A banner drooped from a makeshift pole. Even from this distance, she could make out the twin towers of House Frey. The sight made her blood turn to ice. One of the men near her, a bowman named Ryman, tensed. "Only two? That's strange. They usually come in bigger groups," he muttered. Catelyn frowned. Could be outriders, or maybe the rest are in the village. Either way, we'll have to proceed carefully. She and the others crouched, waiting for their scouts to return. After some minutes, Jurgen slipped back with a hushed report. The hamlet had indeed been visited by a Frey patrol who were taking what little the villagers had left in forced tribute. The rest of the patrol was apparently inside the village barn, rummaging through supplies and roughing up any who complained. In total, maybe 10 or 12 men. The villagers seemed cowed, terrified. "Now's our chance to show them we're not just ghosts in the woods," Catelyn said, her tone steeled. "If we help these villagers, they might stand with us. If we do nothing, their fear will keep them loyal to the Freys." Jurgen nodded but looked uneasy. "We have about 15 fighters here. They have a dozen, but they're Freys, presumably armed. Some of our folk are novices at best." Catelyn slid her hand over the hilt of her sword, feeling a cool determination well in her. "We can't wait. The Riverlands has seen enough fear. Let's give them hope." In hushed voices, they devised a quick plan. Half would approach from the north side of the hamlet, drawing the Freys' attention, while the other half circled around to flank them. With luck, they could trap the patrol between them. The villagers might join once they realized the Freys were outnumbered. Or so they hoped. The plan unfolded swiftly. Catelyn found herself among the group circling to flank. As they moved closer, she heard raised voices, shouts of anger, the thud of a boot connecting with flesh, a woman's cry. Her jaw clenched. They emerged onto the main path. Ahead, she saw 3 Frey men dragging a villager by the scruff of his neck, cursing at him. Another was rifling through a cart of produce. The moment they saw the Riverborn approach, swords and axes were drawn. One of the Freys barked an order for the others to rally. Then a cry rang out from the north side. Martin and Jorgen's contingent had arrived. Caught between two groups, the Freys hesitated, uncertain if they faced a ragtag band of peasants or something more. In that pause, one of the Riverborn loosed an arrow and it struck a Frey square in the shoulder, toppling him. The battle began. Catelyn's heart pounded in her ears. She gripped her short sword. Two Freymen charged at her, shouting curses. Instinct took over. She sidestepped clumsily, nearly losing her footing, but managed to parry a blow that would have carved her side. Sparks flew as steel met steel. Her muscles trembled, unaccustomed to the force. The second man swung his axe toward her shoulder. She ducked, feeling the whoosh of air. A flash of memory assaulted her, a flash of the red wedding, the clang of weapons. She shut it out and focused. She was no warrior, but desperation fueled her. She feinted, then drove her sword into the man's thigh. He screamed, staggering back. She spun to face the other, the one with the sword, who eyed her with fury. "Lady Stone come back from the grave, is it?" he spat, sneering. She realized with a chill that rumors must have been circulating about her resurrection. But she merely leveled her blade. He lunged, their weapons scraping. He was stronger, pressing her back. She nearly stumbled over a barrel. At the last moment, an arrow from behind her whizzed past and struck him through the gut. He groaned and collapsed, glaring at her with hatred in his final moments. Catelyn looked back to see Ryman, bow in hand, giving her a tight nod before turning to find another target. Around her, the clash of weapons echoed in the hamlet. The villagers watched, some cowering, others hesitating as if they might join in. A few had picked up pitchforks or clubs. The Freys, disorganized and outflanked, began to falter. Martin's sword flashed in the sunlight, and Celia danced around another Frey soldier, her dagger cutting a wicked path. The man with the missing ear tackled an enemy to the ground. The scuffle was fierce but swift. Soon, the remaining Freys either lay dead or were on their knees, weapons discarded. A hush fell over the hamlet, broken only by the ragged breathing of the fighters and the sobs of those wounded. Some of the villagers crept out from behind doors and wagons, eyes wide with disbelief. One old woman stepped forward, trembling, and spat at the nearest Frey corpse. Then, timidly, a few others began to murmur their thanks, their voices laced with relief and fear. Catelyn, panting, surveyed the scene. Blood stained her blade and flecked her tunic. She wiped sweat from her brow. This was no grand victory in the sense of a pitched battle, but it was a victory nonetheless. They had saved this hamlet from further torment. If only for the moment. She approached a gray-haired man who seemed to be the village elder. He stared at her with a mix of respect and trepidation. "Who are you?" he asked hoarsely. She sheathed her sword and spoke, striving for a dignity that belied her blood-spattered state. "I am Catelyn Tully, once of Riverrun." That name sparked a flicker of recognition in his eyes. She raised her voice so that the surrounding villagers could hear. "We fight for the Riverlands, for House Tully, and for any who have suffered under Frey or Lannister oppression. We will not abandon you, but we need your help in return." Silence, thick as fog, settled over them. Then the elder bowed his head. "My lady," he said, voice quivering. "We thought all the Tullys were gone. We have so little, but what we have is yours if you'll protect us." A hush of agreement passed through the other villagers. Some looked to the half-felled barn where a pair of Frey bodies still sprawled in the dirt. They seemed uncertain, as though they could not quite believe they were free of that yoke. But in their eyes, Catelyn saw something else, a spark of hope. She nodded gravely. "We'll do our best to keep you safe. In return, we need fresh supplies if you can spare them. We also ask that any man or woman willing to bear arms join us, or at least stand ready to defend your home when the time comes." The elder cast a glance around. "We have few men of fighting age, war's taken most. But we'll do what we can. We have no love for House Frey." He spat on the ground. Catelyn understood the cost she was asking for. These were ordinary people who only wanted to survive. But survival would be short-lived under Frey dominion. To truly secure their freedom, they needed a cause that could inspire unity. "Tell others," she said softly. "Send word to nearby villages. Let them know House Tully is not finished, that the rightful lady stands with them." At her words, Jorgen began to organize the Riverborn, ensuring the Frey survivors were bound. One or two had surrendered. Some argued they should be executed on the spot to make a statement. Catelyn held up a hand. "We must be better than they are," she insisted, though her heart still throbbed with a thirst for vengeance. "We'll take them as prisoners for now." A few grumbled, but they obeyed. She knew it was a calculated risk. Keeping enemies alive could be a liability. Yet slaughtering prisoners would be an act Walder Frey himself might commit. She refused to sink to that. That evening, the villagers prepared a meager meal to share. Some root stew, stale bread, a bit of salted pork. It was not a feast, but it replenished the weary fighters. Catelyn ate in silence, seated by a small fire behind the elder's hut. Celia joined her, leaning her head back against the wall in exhaustion. "We did good today," Celia murmured, stirring the stew with a wooden spoon. Catelyn nodded, though her thoughts were already racing ahead. This was only the beginning. Houses in the Riverlands would need more substantial proof that a Tully-led rebellion stood a chance. She had to rally them quickly before the Freys responded with overwhelming force. The memory of the Red Wedding was a powerful impetus, but also a warning they could not be lured into another trap. Over the next few days, they helped the villagers fortify their hamlet as best they could, digging ditches, placing sharpened stakes, and forming a rudimentary watch patrol. Volunteers joined the Riverborn, though they were few. News spread, aided by a pair of runners dispatched to surrounding settlements. In hushed whispers, people began to speak of the Lady of Riverrun returned from death, leading a band of rebels against House Fry. Some scoffed, calling it wild rumor. Others, those who clung to the old loyalties, stirred with cautious excitement. All the while, Catelyn felt the relentless pull of Riverrun. She knew she had to see it with her own eyes, even if only from afar. She needed to assess its defenses, glean whether the rumors of Edmure's imprisonment were true. But there was another tug, deeper still, the call of her children. She wanted to go south, to King's Landing, for Sansa's sake, or to search the war-ravaged land for Arya. She wanted to chase the faintest rumor of Bran and Rickon being alive. Yet as she looked upon the farmland and the ragged folk who offered her what scraps they had, she recognized that her fate was bound to these people now. If she abandoned them in search of her children, she would condemn them to fall once more under Fry rule. She could not do that. So she forced herself to be patient. She would build a foundation of strength here in the Riverlands first. Each night, she recited prayers in her mind, though she was uncertain which gods might still listen to her. The mother for mercy, the warrior for strength, the father for justice. And somewhere, in the dark corners of her soul, the wolf in the north howled, urging her toward retribution. About a week after they had liberated the hamlet, word came from one of their runners that a lesser lord, Ser Jon Mosby, had expressed quiet support for the Tully cause. His small holdfast was a day's ride north. Catelyn decided to journey there with a select group, hoping to gain an ally. She left Jurgen behind with a dozen men to protect the hamlet, while she, Martin, Celia, and a handful of others rode out. They traveled carefully, skirting main roads and moving through wooded paths. The air was turning colder, autumn well underway. Red and golden leaves drifted onto the ground, a reminder that winter was on the horizon. The crisp breeze carried a faint tang of smoke from distant hearths. By late afternoon, they found Ser Jon Mosby's holdfast, an old stone tower atop a small rise, encircled by a low curtain wall. It was modest compared to Riverrun or other great keeps. As they approached, a single guard peered down from the wall, hand on his sword. Martin held up a white scrap of cloth in a gesture of parley. After a few tense moments, the gate creaked open, revealing a courtyard where a handful of men-at-arms stood warily. Catelyn and her companions dismounted, cautious. An older man with thinning hair and a lined face stepped forward. He wore a simple surcoat bearing his house sigil, 3 pine cones on a field of brown. This must be Ser Jon Mosby, she thought. He glanced at Catelyn, taking in her patched clothing and the sword at her hip, his brow knitted in concern. She offered a small bow of her head. "I am Catelyn Tully, Ser Jon. I've heard you are a friend to my father's memory." A flicker of recognition crossed his features. He looked uncertain, as though he couldn't quite believe. "Lady Stark?" he breathed, eyes lingering on the scars around her throat. "Lady Tully," she corrected gently, mindful of the identity she wished to project. "Though I was also Lady Stark in another life. Word reached us that you might support the Tully cause." He hesitated, then gestured for them to follow him inside. The interior of the tower was small, a single hall with a table and a few chairs. A meager fire crackled in a hearth. Once they were seated, Ser Jon dismissed his men, though a handful remained nearby, clearly uneasy. Over a simple meal of bread and watered wine, Catelyn laid out her request. She spoke of reuniting the Riverlands under a Tully banner, of driving out the Freys who had usurped her father's seat at Riverrun. She did not embellish. She told him plainly that they were few but growing. Ser Jon listened, occasionally rubbing the stubble on his chin. When she finished, he let out a long sigh. "Lord Hoster Tully was always kind to my family," he said quietly. "He stood by us when we fell on hard times. If you truly are his daughter, I owe you a debt of loyalty. But these are dangerous times. The Freys and Lannisters hold most power here, and they've been merciless with those they suspect of plotting rebellion. I know, Catelyn said, meeting his gaze. But what alternative do we have? Shall we let them keep the Riverlands in chains? The phrase broke sacred guest right. They disgraced our land and spilled innocent blood. If they remain unchallenged, their cruelty will only grow. His eyes flickered with a mixture of shame and anger. You speak truth, my lady. And yet I worry about what might come of open defiance. I have a small garrison, a few dozen men. Against the phrase might. He fell silent, and she saw his fear plainly. She could not promise him certain victory. Nobody could. I will not lie to you, she said softly. We are outnumbered, and it will be difficult. But if you join us now, if we band together with others who still remember the Tully name, we stand a chance. Once more people see that we can resist, they'll rally to us. The phrase thrive on fear and division. We must unite. Ser John's gaze drifted to his hearth. The firelight danced over his lined face, revealing a man torn between duty and survival. At last, he gave a curt nod. I will help, my lady, but I must do so discreetly at first. If the phrase learn of my allegiance too soon, they'll crush us. Catelyn exhaled, relief stirring in her chest. That's all I ask. Discretion and quiet support until we can gather enough strength. She paused, then gently took his hand. Thank you, Ser John. You do the Riverlands a great honor. He bowed his head. I only hope I'm doing right by my people. They spent the evening discussing logistics. Ser John offered a small stockpile of arms and some grain. He also promised to send out trusted messengers to certain nearby lords, though he warned that some had already bent the knee to the phrase in exchange for favors. Martin and Celia spoke of strategic points where they could avoid Fry patrols. Through it all, Catelyn felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time since her resurrection, she began to see the shape of a larger plan forming. They might actually stand a chance of mustering enough forces to challenge the phrase, perhaps even lay siege to Riverrun if fortune favored them. Yet in the quiet intervals, doubt gnawed at her. She was no experienced battle commander. Her knowledge of warfare was gleaned from observing Ned and Robb, from hearing her father's war stories. She was still exhausted, still haunted by the nightmares of the twins. And the knowledge that her children were scattered or imprisoned weighed heavily on her heart. But she forced herself to be steady, to remember she had a duty to these people who believed in the Tully name. Late that night, as the others bedded down in the tower's cramped quarters, Catelyn sat by the embers of the dying fire. The hush of night pressed in, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. She felt strangely awake, as if some unseen current of energy coursed through her. Or perhaps it was the restlessness of a spirit not fully at peace. She recalled the final moments of her life, the despair that had driven her to claw at her own face in grief. She had been ready to die for Robb, for her children. But fate had other ideas, and now she was here, forging alliances and planning rebellions. A wry, bitter smile curled her lips. The gods played cruel games sometimes. Was she merely a pawn in some cosmic jest, or was there truly a design behind her second chance? She closed her eyes, letting out a slow breath. In her mind, she saw Riverrun's gates opening wide, saw her brother Edmure smiling in relief, the Tully banner restored. It was a fragile vision, but she clung to it. For so long as she drew breath, even borrowed breath, she would fight to make it real. Sleep claimed her eventually, though it was restless. At dawn, they departed Ser John's holdfast, loaded with a small wagon of supplies and the promise of his stealthy support. Over the next weeks, they traveled from one friendly contact to another, always wary of Fry patrols. Some lords rebuffed them, claiming neutrality or fear. Others pledged quiet assistance. Each small victory was a step forward, each refusal a reminder of the daunting odds they faced. In the hamlet they had first liberated, more refugees trickled in, bringing tales of Fry brutality or Lannister raids. The Riverborn's numbers grew slowly, a few at a time, men and women who had lost everything except the desire for vengeance. They were not an army yet, but a formidable guerrilla force, adept at striking quickly and vanishing into the countryside. They ambushed small Fry patrols, freed captive villages, and seized supply wagons meant for the Fry garrisons. Rumors spread that the Lady of Riverrun herself was haunting the Riverlands, a specter of justice. Such rumors did not go unnoticed by the phrase. More and more patrols combed the region, searching for any sign of rebellion. Posters were nailed to trees and tavern walls, bearing a crude likeness of Catelyn's face, labeling her an outlaw and a traitor. Anyone caught aiding her would face swift retribution. Some villagers cowered, but others hid the posters or tore them down in solidarity. The seeds of defiance had been planted and no threat could fully uproot them. Catelyn soon realized that they could not remain a scattered resistance forever. They needed a secure stronghold, a place to gather and train, to store supplies and house refugees. Riverrun was their ultimate goal, but it was too well defended at the moment. So she set her sights on a smaller keep once held by a minor Tully bannerman who had since been stripped of lands by the Freys. If they could capture and fortify that keep, it would serve as a rallying point for the entire region. It was a risky plan, requiring stealth, cunning, and enough fighters to storm the garrison that currently occupied the keep. But if they succeeded, they would have a base of operations that lent them legitimacy. Day by day, they scouted the keep's defenses, identified the number of Frey men stationed there, and planned their approach. Catelyn herself insisted on seeing the walls from a distance, perched behind a low hill. The stonework looked ancient but sturdy, the gate guarded by a pair of Frey soldiers at all times. The keep's small tower rose above the surrounding farmland, a beacon of what could be theirs if they dared to seize it. As she stood there, wind tugging at her cloak, Catelyn felt both fear and anticipation twist in her gut. This was what it meant to lead, not just talk and inspire, but to take decisive action that would cost lives if it failed. She thought of Robb's campaigns, how young he had been, yet so determined. She hoped she had inherited some measure of her son's courage, her father's resolve, and Ned's steady wisdom. Quietly, she prayed to the old gods and the new, hoping they still listened. She prayed for her children's safety, wherever they might be. And she prayed that this risk would not be in vain, that the Riverlands might one day stand free of the Frey shadow, that Riverrun's gates would open once more under the rightful banner of the Tully fish. With the keep in her sights, she turned to her companions, Martin, Celia, Jorgen, Edric, and the others who had risked everything to stand by her side. She drew a deep breath, tasting the crisp autumn air. "We take the keep," she said softly, voice trembling with determination. "And after that, Riverrun. House Tully will rise again." They nodded, their eyes alight with conviction. The plan was set. Victory or death, they would attempt the impossible, because that was all that remained to them. And so, step by step, Catelyn Tully's journey across the Riverlands gained momentum. From a forgotten corpse in a cold river to the reluctant heart of a budding rebellion, she had been shaped by sorrow into something fierce and unyielding. She knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, but she also knew that she no longer walked it alone. The Riverlands stirred beneath her banner, awakened from a nightmare of subjugation, ready to fight for the promise of a better dawn. At the heart of it all, the Lady of Riverrun pressed forward, unbroken, her spirit burning with a fire that no Frey blade could extinguish. Catelyn Tully woke to the sound of a distant horn echoing through the damp morning air, a low, mournful note that shivered along her spine and set every nerve on edge. For one disoriented heartbeat, she forgot where she was. Not in Winterfell's cozy chambers, nor in Riverrun's stately halls, but beneath a makeshift canvas roof beside a bramble-choked hill. Her breath caught, memories flooding back. She was not simply Catelyn Tully, Lady of Riverrun. She was a woman who had died and returned, a vessel of both grief and iron resolve. They were camped at the edge of a forest, hidden by thick undergrowth, while a rising sun clawed pale light across a bleak autumn sky. She shoved the thin blanket aside and stood, stretching her sore limbs. The small encampment stirred around her. Figures rose from bedrolls and scattered tents, her ragtag rebels, the Riverborn. Their eyes were weary but determined, their faces etched with the same purpose that had driven them so far already: to reclaim a keep stolen by Frey soldiers, to raise the Tully banner and let the Riverlands know that House Tully was not finished. Word by word, rumor by rumor, they were letting all who would listen know that Lady Catelyn lived and fought for justice. The knowledge gave her strength, even if her body still felt stiff, each joint protesting the demands she placed on it. She caught Celia's eye. Celia was already awake, sharpening a thin-bladed dagger with quick, practiced strokes. Celia's hair hung loose around her shoulders, her brow furrowed with concentration. When she glanced up, the two women exchanged a silent nod of resolve. Nearby, Martin checked his sword belt and tested the pull of his bow. Jorgen prowled the edges of the camp, ensuring that the night's sentries had not missed any sign of approaching patrols. Edric, the old soldier who had known her father, coughed as he hefted a spear, still strong despite his years. Catelyn traced a hand over the hilt of her short sword, remembering the first time she had wielded steel in earnest. She had been clumsy, half-dazed by the reality of her own resurrection. Now the sword felt more familiar, She would never fight with the grace of a knight, but she had at least learned to brace herself for the shock of blade meeting blade. The horn's echo faded. At first, she feared it signaled a Fry patrol scouting the perimeter, but Jurgen approached with a shake of his head. Sounded distant, he murmured. Likely a call between Fry outposts. No sign they've spotted us. She nodded, thankful for small mercies. We move at twilight, she reminded him, voice hushed. Under darkness, we'll have the advantage. He agreed and moved off to speak with a group of newly recruited villagers, men and women who wore old leather jerkins or no armor at all. Some cradled pitchforks or old spears. A few gripped scavenged swords. Their faces showed nervousness, but also a kind of hunger to fight back, to no longer be victims. She recognized that hunger. It was the same fire in her own belly. Throughout the day, they lay low, keeping the fire small, gathering final intelligence about the keep's defenses. Scouts returned with whispered updates, the number of Fry men on watch, the pattern of guard rotations, the best approaches to the gate. Catelyn pored over every detail, heart-thudding when she considered how precarious their plan was. They needed to strike swiftly, rely on the element of surprise, overwhelm the guards before the alarm could spread. If they seized the gatehouse, they could prevent reinforcements from pouring in. And if the keep's small garrison was taken unawares, they might surrender or at least be slow to respond. It was a gamble that could cost many lives if it went wrong. She paced among the trees, recalling how often she had watched Robb plan his battles. That had been a different life, a time when she still held some faith that honor and mercy might carry them through. Now she knew better. The Riverlands had been taught a brutal lesson in betrayal and the futility of misplaced trust. Justice would not come gently. Her father's words, family, duty, honor, resonated in her mind, but so did the memory of her final moments at the Twins, the wet ripping sound of steel and flesh, the stink of blood on the floor. At dusk, the time came. They snuffed out their fires, packed what little gear they had, and left behind a small contingent to guard the camp and watch their horses. Catelyn would lead 24 fighters in the first wave, including Celia, Martin, and Jurgen. Another group of 10 would circle around to the rear, prepared to attack the keep from behind if an opportunity arose or to ambush any Fry soldiers who tried to flee. The walk to the keep was unnervingly quiet. The forest swallowed their footfalls, dead leaves muffling every step. The air bit with the chill of approaching winter, carrying the faint smell of decay as the leaves turned from gold to brown. She caught glimpses of her companions' faces in the dying light. Resolve, fear, grim determination. She imagined her own face reflected that same intensity. By the time they reached the outer fields, night had settled. Clouds shrouded the moon, granting them extra cover. From behind a row of scrubby bushes, Catelyn peered at the keep. Its squat tower and curtain wall were outlined against a sky that was more dark gray than black. Torchlight flickered at the gatehouse, where 2 guards lounged with spears in hand. She could see no other movement. If the scouts' reports were correct, there would be 6 or 7 more men inside, fewer if some were asleep or drunk. A precarious guess, but the best they had. Jurgen crept closer, gesturing for 3 others to follow him. They would handle the gatehouse, slit the guards' throats if they could do it silently. Then Celia and Martin would lead the next wave, surging through before the alarm could be raised. Catelyn would follow, ensuring that confusion did not break their momentum. Sweat trickled down her back despite the cold. She clenched her jaw, willing her body to remain steady. She heard a muffled gasp, then the scrape of a boot on stone. Jurgen's group had leapt from the shadows, knives flashing in the dim torchlight. One guard died with a strangled cry. The second managed to swing his spear, clattering it against the stones as he toppled. That single burst of noise echoed in the still air. Catelyn tensed, praying no one deeper inside had heard. After a heartbeat of silence, she caught Jurgen's silhouette waving for them to come on. Celia and Martin sprinted forward, stooped low, swords at the ready. Catelyn urged the others onward, heart hammering so loudly she could scarcely hear anything else. She nearly tripped on a loose rock but kept her balance, sliding in behind the others. The gatehouse door was unbarred, thanks to Jurgen's quick work. At a whispered order, one of the Riverborn heaved the heavy wooden bar into place from the inside, securing their position. Torch in hand, Martin led them through a short passageway that opened into the main courtyard of the keep. The flickering light revealed a space cluttered with barrels and crates, likely supplies meant for the Fry garrison. Across the courtyard stood a small stone hall, its windows dim. In one corner rose the tower, no more than 3 stories high. The scent of damp straw and old wood hung in the air. Catelyn pressed herself against the wall, scanning for any sign of movement. A muffled shout came from the tower, and then she saw a figure emerge from a side door, one of the Fry soldiers, blinking in confusion. The moment he spotted them, he yelled in alarm and raised a crossbow. An arrow from a riverborn bow caught him in the chest before he could fire. He crashed backward, his shout turning into a gurgle. That single cry, however, was enough. More commotion stirred inside the hall, the pounding of boots on stone. "They're on us now," Celia hissed. "No more stealth. Forward," Catelyn commanded, stepping into the open. "Take the hall and the tower quickly." Her voice rang out, surprising even herself. She refused to cower in the shadows while her people risked their lives. A half-dozen Riverborn surged toward the hall's door, which banged open to reveal 3 Fry men armed with swords and axes. The clash of steel echoed off the walls. Martin was among the first to engage, his blades scything through the gloom. Celia darted to the side, fending off a wild swing before plunging her dagger into a gap in her opponent's armor. Catelyn advanced more cautiously, short sword held ready. A Fry soldier lunged at her, face twisted with rage. He recognized her, or thought he did, and bellowed something about a ghost. She gritted her teeth and blocked, steel jarred by the impact. She pivoted her feet, awkward but determined, and slashed across his arm. He roared and stumbled, giving Ryman, her best archer with a drawn short sword now, a chance to sink steel into his back. Chaos overtook the courtyard. A few more Fry soldiers rushed in from the tower's door, but the Riverborn had the advantage of numbers. The Freys were scattered, disorganized, unprepared for a sudden nighttime attack. Still, they fought viciously, cursing, blades glinting in the unsteady torchlight. Catelyn glimpsed one of her own, a young man named Willis, go down with a crossbow bolt in his leg. She felt a surge of anger and fear for him. Another of her rebels rushed to drag him behind a barrel. She drove forward, gripping her sword so tightly her knuckles ached. A Fry near the tower turned to run, perhaps to reach the rooftop or call for reinforcements. Before he could vanish into the stairwell, Edric's spear found his back in a sickening crunch. "Secure the tower," Catelyn shouted, voice raw. "Make sure no one escapes." 3 Riverborn sprang to obey, vanishing into the tower doorway. Screams and footsteps thundered on the spiral stairs within. Meanwhile, the last knot of Fry resistance congregated near the doors of the stone hall, cursing and swinging. They realized they were outnumbered, but pride and desperation made them dangerous. Jurgen flung himself into the thick of it, hacking down a Fry man who wore a battered helmet. Blood splattered across the crates. Celia attacked another from behind. He toppled with a groan, dropping his shield. Martin parried a clumsy blow and slashed in return. It felt like an eternity, but in truth the scuffle ended as abruptly as it began. One Fry soldier threw down his weapon and raised his hands, while another sank to his knees, gasping from a sword wound to the abdomen. Across the courtyard, the echo of fighting in the tower faded. Moments later, the 3 Riverborn who had gone inside emerged, bloodied but triumphant. "All clear," one panted. A couple tried to surrender. "We bound them." Catelyn exhaled as though releasing a huge weight from her chest. She surveyed the courtyard, dead bodies strewn across the stones, the wounded groaning, the living panting in exhaustion. In the flickering torchlight, blood looked like an inky black stain. She moved among her people, checking on their injuries. Willis groaned softly, clutching his leg. Another man lay still, eyes staring blankly. She did not know his name. He had joined them only days before, another villager who wanted vengeance. Her heart twisted at the sight. A few more rebels were injured to varying degrees. Some had only scratches or bruises, but their eyes were wide with the shock of real combat. In total, they had lost perhaps 2 or 3. A bitter cost, but not as high as it might have been. The Fry garrison was nearly annihilated. A few survivors huddled, disarmed, guarded by 2 Riverborn with drawn blades. One was the man who had thrown down his sword, a middle-aged fellow with trembling hands. He had the look of someone who never expected real warfare, only intimidation and petty cruelty. Now he faced the consequences. Catelyn wiped her sword on a rag, then slid it back into its scabbard. She approached the prisoners, her blood pulsing with cold anger. She could sense the tension in her own men. Some would rather cut these Freys down than risk letting them live. But she forced herself to be resolute. "I will not kill men who have surrendered," she said aloud, letting her voice carry. "We keep them bound. They will stand trial or remain as hostages if need be. We are not the Red Wedding come again. We do not murder prisoners." She caught Celia's eye. Celia gave a curt nod, though she was grim-lipped. In the flickering torchlight, her face was painted with spatters of blood. "As you say, my lady." Some of the Riverborn grumbled, but no one disobeyed. Catelyn lifted her chin, conscious of the authority she now wielded. She remembered standing behind Robb at war councils or behind Ned during his judgments. Always she had deferred to them. Now she was the final word. She had to believe that she was guiding them towards something better than endless slaughter. "Search the keep," she ordered. "Secure every room. Tend to our wounded. Let's see what supplies and weapons we have won tonight." They set to work, rummaging through crates, forcing open doors, and bringing out startled servants who had taken refuge. Most of these servants were small folk who had no allegiance to House Fry, only an allegiance to survival. Wide-eyed, they stared at the band of rebels with fear. Catelyn, wanting to calm them, gently assured them that no harm would come if they cooperated. Edric questioned them about secret compartments or hidden stashes of weapons. Gradually, it became clear that the keep held decent supplies: barrels of grain, salted fish, dried fruits, a stockpile of arrows, a few suits of ill-fitting armor. Enough to bolster their growing rebellion for a while. She climbed the winding steps to the top of the tower, her boots echoing. The climb made her knees protest, but she pressed on. A single torchlit chamber at the top opened onto a parapet. She emerged into the cool night air. From here, she could see the moon breaking through shredded clouds, illuminating the farmland beyond. Darkness cloaked most of the scenery, but she could imagine the shape of the rolling hills, the winding streams. Over that horizon lay Riverrun. She wondered if Edmure was still alive somewhere within its walls. She tried to envision the fortress she had once called home. It seemed so close, and yet an entire war, an entire lifetime sprawled between them. She felt a presence behind her. Turning, she saw Celia had followed. Wed. Celia's face was pale, lines of fatigue around her mouth. She rested her hand on the hilt of her dagger as she took in the view. "We did it," she said quietly. "The keep is ours, if only for a time." Catelyn let out a slow breath, her mind already churning with what came next. "It's a start," she replied. "But we'll need to hold this place against reprisals. The Freys will notice eventually. They'll wonder why their men haven't reported back. We'll reinforce the walls," Celia said with quiet certainty. "And we can send out a few messengers to let our allies know we have a foothold now. Sir John Mosby might send extra men, or at least some provisions. Others might follow." The wind tugged at Catelyn's hair. She brushed it aside, gazing into the black horizon. "I want to fortify quickly," she said. "But more than that, I want the small folk nearby to know we'll protect them. If they see a Tully banner flying here, they might be emboldened, even if only a handful come. Every sword, every pitchfork matters." A faint smile curved Celia's lips. "I'll see to it a banner is made. A large one." They stood in silence for a moment, side by side. Despite the chill, Catelyn felt a flicker of warmth, a sense that they were accomplishing something beyond simple bloodshed. This keep would become a beacon. Not a grand seat of power, but a sign that resistance existed, that House Tully's spirit was unbroken. For all the horrors she had endured, for all the darkness that lingered in her soul since her resurrection, this single victory felt like a fragile bud of hope. Eventually, they descended back into the bustle of the courtyard. The Riverborn had lit a few torches and lanterns, pushing the gloom aside. Men and women dragged the bodies of the slain to a corner outside the walls where a common grave would likely be dug. A small group tended to the wounded, including the Fry prisoners who might still be saved. Catelyn was relieved to see that her people were heeding her insistence on mercy toward captives. She knew it was a risk, but it was one she would bear. It set them apart from the cruelty of Walder Fry, whose betrayal at the twins still stained the land. By the time the first tendrils of dawn streaked the sky, the keep was more or less under control. Catelyn finally allowed herself to collapse on a wooden bench in what must have been the keep's modest great hall, now strewn with crates and bedrolls. Her body throbbed with fatigue, her eyes burned. Celia dozed in a corner, arms wrapped around her knees. Martin sat on a stool, head bowed. No one truly relaxed, but the tension had eased to a dull hum instead of a shrill alarm. A few of her rebels trickled in to report. Jurgen detailed how they'd found stables with room for perhaps half a dozen horses, though only 2 scrawny mares were actually there. Edric recounted the location of hidden cellars storing wine and pickled vegetables. Ryman inspected the gatehouse, concluding it needed repairs. The keep was workable, but everything reeked of neglect. That was fine, though. They could fix it over time. They would make this place a fortress of their own. At last, Catelyn closed her eyes, letting weariness drag her toward sleep. Images fluttered through her mind. Rob's final moments, Ned's distant smile, her children as they once were, laughing and playing in Winterfell's courtyards. Then she drifted into a troubled slumber. When she woke, hours later, watery daylight streamed through the hall's narrow windows. The ache in her shoulders and legs had settled into a stiff reminder of the battle. She raked her fingers through her hair, wishing for a moment that she could be that proper lady again, groomed and graceful in a morning gown. But that woman was gone. She set her jaw and rose, searching for water to splash her face. The courtyard bustled with activity. Some rebels stacked crates along the walls to form rudimentary defensive positions, others hammered planks to reinforce a damaged gate. 2 archers practiced shooting at a target near the far end, their arrows thumping into the wood with varying degrees of accuracy. Celia oversaw a handful of villagers who were clearing debris while Martin inspected the armory they'd found in one of the side chambers. A small cook fire burned in the courtyard where a scrawny pig was roasting. The smell twisted Catelyn's stomach. She realized she was ravenous. She had a bowl of thin porridge pressed into her hands, and she ate standing, scanning every corner of the keep with a critical eye. It was far from impregnable. The curtain wall was not tall, and the tower, though sturdy, provided limited vantage. A determined force could overwhelm them if they were not careful. But they had no choice. They needed a base of operations, and this was it. She refused to yield to pessimism. Instead, she caught Celia's arm gently. "Send word to Mosby and to any other allies we have. Let them know we're here and that we need reinforcements. Discretion is still crucial, but we won't keep this a secret for long." Celia nodded, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "We'll send out 2 riders by different routes," she said. "Minimizes the chance they're caught by Fry patrols." Catelyn agreed, then turned as Jurgen approached with a grim expression. "More wounded than we hoped," he said under his breath. "We've patched up what we can, but a couple might lose limbs if the wounds fester. We've no proper maester here." The reminder stung. She remembered the comfort of having Maester Lewin in Winterfell or Maester Vyman in Riverrun with their stores of medicines and steady competence. She had none of that now, only raw will and the rudimentary skills of her rebels. "Do what you can," she said softly. "We might send 1 or 2 to Sir John's holdfast if we can spare the guards. Maybe he has someone who knows more about healing." They spoke a while longer about logistics and security. Several local farmhands, pressed into the Frey's service as reluctant labor, had sworn to remain and help. They'd been ill-treated, half-starved, and had no wish to return to Walder Frey's cruel hand. They knew the surrounding territory well, which could prove invaluable for scouting and forging hidden supply routes. By midday, a cold drizzle began to fall, turning the courtyard's dirt into sticky mud. Catelyn huddled beneath the overhang of the gatehouse, arms crossed. The weather felt symbolic of the uncertain state of their rebellion. Everything was damp, uncomfortable, precarious. And yet they pressed on, determined. That afternoon, they made a small but vital announcement. A fresh Tully banner was hoisted upon the keep's main tower. 2 determined riverborn women who had once been seamstresses in a nearby village stitched the Tully fish onto a patched length of cloth. Though the colors were faded and uneven, red, blue, and silver, they hung it proudly from the topmost parapet. It fluttered in the wind, droplets of rain glinting on the thread. A hush fell over those gathered below. Catelyn stood at the base of the tower, head tilted up. Something in her chest tightened at the sight. How many times had she seen that banner in her youth, snapping smartly in the breeze over Riverrun's battlements? Now it flew over a small, half-ruined keep in the Riverlands, proclaiming that House Tully still had fight left. For all the sorrow and anger that weighed upon her, a glimmer of pride warmed her heart. That night, they held a meager feast of sorts to celebrate. The roast pig, supplemented by foraged mushrooms and some root vegetables, provided a rare moment of camaraderie. They had wine from the cellars, sour but drinkable, and they passed the cups around, whispering toasts to each other and to the memory of fallen friends. Catelyn drank sparingly, mindful of keeping her wits, but she allowed herself a few sips to join the mood. In the corner, Celia even smiled, though her eyes still held the shadows of grief for her slain husband. Martin approached Catelyn at one point in the evening, tugging her aside to a quiet corner. The courtyard was lit by a scattering of torches, the drizzle having finally relented to a damp, chill breeze. "My lady," he said, voice low, "we've done well here, but I worry about what happens when the Freys realize their keep has fallen. They will surely send a larger force. We might be stuck defending a siege." Catelyn considered his words. "We must prepare for the possibility," she admitted, "but we can also continue our raids, draw them away if needed. If the Freys come in force, we'll have to call upon every ally we've made." She paused, crossing her arms. "I won't lie, Martin. It's risky, but we can't stand by and do nothing. If we lose momentum, if we hide forever, the Riverlands will be lost to them entirely." He nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "I follow you," he said simply. "Whatever happens." When the rough celebrations wound down, Catelyn found a quiet place to rest near the hearth in the great hall. She wrapped herself in a thin blanket, listening to the night wind moan through the cracks in the walls. Images spun in her mind, the banner above, the Fry bodies carried away for a pit burial, the hush of triumph that settled over the keep. She squeezed her eyes shut, but instead of dreaming of the red wedding, she dreamed of Riverrun's gates swinging open. She saw Edmure stepping forth, haggard but alive, and he embraced her. She saw the small folk cheering as the Tully fish rose over the ramparts. The dream was so vivid that when she woke just before dawn, her face was wet with tears. She didn't remember crying. In the days that followed, the keep's transformation from a battered outpost to a functioning stronghold continued. Reinforcements trickled in, first a handful of Mossby's men, then a few warriors sent by a minor lord who had once owed fealty to House Tully. They arrived in secret, traveling at night, slipping past Fry patrols. Each arrival bolstered morale, and each new face meant another sword to hold the walls. Catelyn also sent out scouts to spread word among the local villages. They carried a simple message: the Tully banner flies again, and Lady Catelyn invites any who would join the cause to come. Some might bring precious supplies, others perhaps only a willingness to fight. There were those who refused, too terrified of Fry reprisals. But a few came carrying battered heirloom weapons or meager provisions. Former soldiers, old huntsmen, farmhands determined to avenge lost kin. They turned up one by one, two by two, quietly knocking on the gate by moonlight. Each addition gave shape to the dream of a Riverlands united against tyranny. But the phrase did not remain idle. Patrols grew heavier. Occasionally, the keep's lookouts sighted columns of Fry soldiers marching on distant roads or heard rumors of outriders harassing outlying farms. The tension ratcheted higher, a bowstring drawn tight. Everyone knew an attack might come at any time. They reinforced the walls with sharpened stakes, fashioned makeshift barricades, and set watchers on every side. Then, one raw afternoon, came the news Catelyn had both hoped for and dreaded. A messenger arrived breathless at the gate, claiming to bear word from Edmure Tully himself. Catelyn rushed out to greet the newcomer, a youth who looked barely 16, his face smeared with mud and panic. He clutched a scrap of parchment in trembling hands. Once inside the walls, he collapsed onto a bench, gasping for breath. I was with Lord Edmure, he managed, voice quavering. Or at least near him. They keep him at Riverrun, under heavy guard. I'm just a squire. Well, I was a squire to one of the Tully men-at-arms, but the phrase, they. I escaped, my lady. He pressed the parchment forward. I was told to bring this to any Tully loyalist I could find. Catelyn's heart pounded as she took the parchment, which was sealed with the impression of a fish, though the wax was chipped and smeared. She broke it open. The note was short and poorly written, likely scrawled in haste. In a shaky hand it read, I, Edmure Tully, write this from captivity. They threaten my life, but have kept me alive to force obedience from the smallfolk. I do not know how long I can endure this. If you are loyal to House Tully, if my sister Catelyn or any friend still lives, I beg you, Riverrun cannot remain under this false banner. Fry men occupy its halls. They plan to tighten their hold on the Riverlands, break all who resist. If there is any hope, come swiftly. The phrase suspect rebellion stirs, and soon they will stamp it out. The castle is strong, but hearts here still remember House Tully. Forgive my weakness. A final word, Brynden may yet be at large. I do not know. May the gods keep us all. The parchment shook in Catelyn's hands. Reading her brother's words stirred a torrent of emotions, relief that he was alive, horror at his peril, a surge of guilt that she had not rescued him sooner. She swallowed, blinking back tears. Around her, a knot of her closest companions, Celia, Martin, Jurgen, watched anxiously. She steadied her voice. Edmure begs for help. He's under guard at Riverrun. The phrase hold him hostage, no doubt to keep the river lords in line. Her gaze flicked around the courtyard where the Tully banner fluttered in a gust of wind. He also mentions Brynden, my uncle, the Blackfish. If he's truly at large, that's one more ally we can hope for. Martin exhaled. Riverrun, that's a formidable fortress. The phrase must have it well defended. They do, Catelyn agreed, heart-pounding. We can't march in openly. But perhaps we can coordinate with whomever is left inside. If there are still men loyal to House Tully within those walls, we might stand a chance. The messenger squire lifted his weary head. I heard rumors that some men inside, the older guards especially, still hate the phrase and only obey them out of fear for Lord Edmure's life. If we can break that hold. He did not finish, but Catelyn's mind raced. They had to move carefully. A direct siege might only end with Edmure used as a hostage or outright killed. But infiltration, deception, rallying loyalists from within, that could be the key. If she could find a way to free Edmure first or ensure his safety, the phrase power in Riverrun might crumble. That evening, as thunder rumbled distantly, she convened her makeshift war council in the keep's great hall. Jürgen, Celia, Martin, Edric, and 2 others who had proven themselves capable leaders among the Riverborn. The messenger boy sat by, answering their questions as best he could. They spread out a rough sketch of Riverrun's layout that Catelyn had helped draw from memory. She pointed to the main gate, the water gate, the outer walls, the towers, her father's solar, the kitchens. Riverrun's moat is fed by the tumblestone, she explained, tapping the map. They can flood the moat at will, a strong defense. The drawbridge is heavily guarded. Usually, there's also a postern gate, but it's small and well watched. Scaling the walls outright might be impossible unless we have inside help. Even with inside help, the risk is enormous. Edric leaned on his spear. And if we try to starve them out, that gives them time to harm Lord Edmure. The Freys won't hesitate to use him as a shield. Catelyn's throat tightened. Precisely. We need cunning. Perhaps multiple distractions, one force outside, one force infiltrating. If the men inside sense our approach and rise up against the Freys, we might catch them between 2 fires. Jürgen frowned. Do we have enough men for that? We've grown. Aye, but not enough to match what the Freys have at Riverrun. She chewed her lip, thinking. We must gather more allies. House Bracken, House Blackwood. Though they often feud, they both hated Walder Frey for the Red Wedding. Some of them might join us if we approach carefully. Any Tully bannermen who still remember the old days might commit if they see a real chance of success. The key is to present them with a plan that doesn't look like a suicide mission. The talk went on late into the night, the thunder drawing closer, until a heavy rain finally broke over the keep's rooftop, drumming on the slate and trickling through cracks in the walls. When at last they adjourned, no final decision had been reached, but a sense of grim purpose bound them. Riverrun was not just a distant hope now. It was a target, a place where Edmure and the ghost of House Tully awaited deliverance. Catelyn felt that pull stronger than ever, as though the very stones of her childhood home called out to her. In the days that followed, scouts were dispatched in every direction to seek out possible allies. The messenger boy was given a place of shelter and rest, then coached on how to guide a small infiltration team if needed. Meanwhile, the Riverborn continued to fortify their keep. They expected a Frey reprisal any day, but the patrols circled warily, as if uncertain whether to attack or wait. Perhaps Walder Frey was busy with other concerns, or perhaps he believed that a larger strike at the rebellious keep could wait until he had enough men to crush them utterly. Regardless, time was their ally and their enemy both. Each day they remained unchallenged, gave them a chance to recruit more fighters and gather supplies. But each day also allowed the Freys to tighten their grip on Riverrun and keep Edmure under lock and key. Some nights, Catelyn lay awake wondering if she should ride out alone in some mad dash, or if she should storm Riverrun's gate with her meager force. But cooler heads prevailed, reminding her that a reckless move might doom her brother. At last, one of her scouts returned with promising news. A certain Lady Amaris of House Wayne had quietly offered support. House Wayne was a minor house, but they commanded a stout tower and 50 skilled archers. Another rumor whispered that the Blackwood heir might be gathering men in secret, though no official envoy had reached them. Meanwhile, a half-dozen bandits, formerly just marauders, had turned up at the keep's gate, swearing fealty to Catelyn if she would pardon their misdeeds, for they too had lost kin at the twins. The lines of friend and foe were shifting as grudges against House Frey outweighed lesser rivalries. With each new ally, Catelyn felt the dream of reclaiming Riverrun come into sharper focus. She could almost hear the echo of her father's voice in the halls, telling her that no single trout could defeat a hungry pike, but a school of them together would stand a chance. The image made her smile grimly. She would bring every scattered trout she could find. Late one afternoon, as she stood on the tower parapet, gazing at the horizon, Celia climbed up behind her. The wind whipped Celia's hair across her face. "A rider approaches," she said, pointing. "He bears no banner we recognize." Catelyn peered into the distance. Sure enough, a lone rider trotted across the fields, picking his way carefully. A muddy cloak obscured much of his garb. She ordered the gate opened only after their lookouts determined he was alone. Several armed rebels stood ready in the courtyard as the rider entered. Catelyn descended the tower, stepping forward. Pulling back his hood, the rider revealed a lined face, bright eyes, and short gray hair. He looked travel-worn. "I bring tidings from the Blackfish," he said in a rasping voice that carried enough authority to make everyone listen. "He sends his greetings to the Lady of Riverrun, who he's heard stands against the Freys." Catelyn's heart leapt. "My uncle," she breathed. "So he truly is at large?" The rider nodded. "Ser Brynden is well, though pressed on many sides. He can't march openly, but he's gathered a small force in the forests near the Red Fork. Word of your victories has reached him. He hopes to join forces if we can coordinate a strike." Murmurs of excitement rippled through the courtyard. The Blackfish was known for his skill and tenacity. His presence would be a boon to their cause. Catelyn inclined her head. "You have my gratitude. Please come inside. Tell me everything." They gathered once more in the Great Hall, listening as the messenger described how Brynden Tully, known as the Blackfish, had evaded Frey hunts by slipping through their lines. He had a band of loyal soldiers who had escaped the carnage at the Twins and refused to swear to the usurpers in Riverrun. They were living off the land, harassing Frey supply lines, and waiting for a chance to strike. Now, with Catelyn raising the Tully banner, that chance seemed nearer. The messenger outlined a bold plan. If they could coordinate with the Blackfish's band and perhaps other allies, they might converge on Riverrun from multiple fronts. One group could feign a frontal assault at a distant gate, drawing attention, while another slipped inside with the help of any loyalists on the inside. If Edmure could be freed quickly, that might prompt more of the castle garrison, those still quietly loyal, to turn on the Freys. Hope flared in Catelyn's chest. She tried to temper it with caution. She had learned how swiftly hope could be snuffed out. Yet as they huddled over the map of Riverrun once again, discussing infiltration points, diversionary tactics, and secret signals, she sensed a growing conviction in everyone's voices. This was no longer a desperate band of a few dozen rebels. This was the seat of a larger force, guided by Catelyn Tully and Brynden Blackfish. The Freys would not stand unopposed for much longer. Days turned into weeks as they refined the plan. Scouts came and went, carrying coded messages between the keep and the Blackfish's camp. House Wayne's archers arrived, setting up at the keep and practicing daily. More volunteers trickled in, men with old grudges, women who'd lost families, older knights longing to restore honor to the Riverlands. The courtyard filled with the clang of steel on steel as novices trained under those with battlefield experience. Barrels of arrows and sacks of grain piled high. They still weren't an army to rival the Freys in open battle, but they were becoming a formidable strike force. At night, Catelyn walked the ramparts alone, wrestling with her own doubts. She thought of her children, scattered like leaves in a gale. She wondered if Sansa still lived under the Lannisters' thumb, if Arya roamed somewhere beyond the hills, if Bran and Rickon had truly perished, or if they remained hidden. She could not chase every rumor at once. Duty to her homeland, to her father's legacy, demanded she focus on retaking Riverrun first. Maybe after that she could gather enough strength to search for her daughters. Or perhaps the gods would grant her a chance to see them again once the Riverlands were free. She prayed, but the gods rarely answered. Winter's chill deepened and the nights grew long. Frost rhymed the keep's courtyard at dawn, and each morning saw the rebels warming themselves at small fires before beginning their tasks. Despite the cold, their morale was high. They knew a pivotal moment approached. Finally, the day came when the Blackfish's messenger returned with a single coded phrase, "The waters stir." It meant Brynden was ready. Within a fortnight, he planned to move his band closer to Riverrun. The final rendezvous point was a wooded tract near the Tumblestone's eastern bend. Together, they would plan the strike on the castle. In response, Catelyn gathered her most trusted companions, Celia, Martin, Jorgen, Edric, and a few leaders of newly arrived troops, and announced they would march. Not in the open, not with banners flying, but in small, coordinated groups that would reconvene near Riverrun. The keep would be left under the command of a capable lieutenant, along with enough defenders to hold it if the Freys attacked in their absence. Catelyn was determined not to lose the foothold they had fought so hard for. The departure was bittersweet. On the morning they set out, a thin dusting of snow covered the ground, crunching underfoot. Catelyn stood atop the gatehouse with Celia and Martin, watching as the first column of Riverborn shuffled out, packs and weapons strapped to their backs. The Tully banner above them rustled in the breeze, as if urging them onward. She remembered leaving Winterfell once, leaving Riverrun countless times, each farewell laced with uncertainty. But now she felt a fiercer resolve. This was her choice, her path, guided by duty and a thirst for justice. They moved in small groups, using back roads and forest trails. Snow mingled with soggy leaves, turning the journey into a cold, muddy ordeal. Spirits remained high, though bolstered by the thought of reuniting with the Blackfish. At night, they made hidden camps, lighting only small fires, exchanging quiet stories of home and kin. Some had served the Tullus all their lives, others were newcomers to the cause. But each one wore the determination that the Red Wedding's treachery would not go unanswered. At last, they reached the appointed wood near the Tumblestone. The winding river gleamed like dull silver in the winter light. Smoke from distant chimney fires signaled they were close to settlements loyal to the phrase or forced to appear so. The Riverborn set up a discreet camp in a hollow nestled between fir trees. Scouts fanned out to watch for signs of pursuit. On the second evening in that wood, a trio of riders arrived quietly, guided by Catelyn's sentries. In the fading light, she recognized one of the men by his lean frame and the distinctive Tully nose. Brynden, the Blackfish, his hair gone almost entirely gray, but his eyes sharp as ever. He swung down from his horse and clasped her hand, then, in a rare show of emotion, pulled her into a brief embrace. "Niece," he murmured, voice rough. "You've done well. The rumors said you were dead, then undead, but I see your spirit's as fierce as ever." Her eyes stung. This was the first family she had laid eyes on since the Red Wedding. "Uncle," she replied, swallowing the thick knot in her throat. "I grieved you lost. To see you again. I can't tell you what it means." He squeezed her shoulder, his gaze flicking over her scarred throat. Understanding and sorrow passed across his features. Then he composed himself, turning to Martin, Celia, and the others. They all gathered around a crackling fire, small and carefully shielded to avoid attracting attention, and for hours they spoke in hushed tones about the plan to retake Riverrun. Brynden detailed what he knew of the castle's defenses, gleaned from spies and a few clandestine messages from within. The Freys were indeed numerous, but many local men pressed into service despised their overlords. If Edmure could be freed or at least protected from retribution, the garrison might splinter. A wedge of loyal Frey bannermen would still fight fiercely, but they might be outflanked by an uprising on the inside. Meanwhile, Catelyn's forces and the Blackfish's band would assault from without. If they could open even one gate to let the rebels flood in, Riverrun would be theirs. Timing, Brynden stressed, is everything. We must strike with precision. If the Freys realize too soon that something's amiss, they'll kill Edmure or use him as a bargaining chip. Catelyn nodded. "We'll have infiltration teams. I'll lead one, if you agree, Uncle. I know the castle's secret ways, at least some of them. I can pass for a servant or at least keep my face hidden until the right moment." Brynden looked at her for a long moment, sadness mingled with pride. "Niece, you've seen enough horrors. Are you certain you want to lead that part?" She straightened her spine. "I am. I won't cower while others risk their lives for my family's home. Let me be the one to find Edmure or to secure him from harm." Brynden opened his mouth as if to argue, then saw the determination in her eyes. Slowly, he inclined his head. "Very well. We'll form a small group. Stealth will matter more than numbers. The rest will wait for our signal. We'll arrange torches on the ramparts if we succeed in taking the inner gatehouse." They discussed the final details late into the night, placing small carved stones on a rough outline of Riverrun's walls to represent their forces, planning signals, fallback points, and the time to strike, dawn in 3 days when the guards might be groggy from the night watch. Or so they hoped. Brynden also mentioned that if the infiltration failed, he would not throw all their forces away in a futile assault. The plan hinged on surprise. The next 2 days passed in tense preparation. Men and women sharpened weapons, tested ropes and grappling hooks, and prepared strips of dark cloth to wrap around armor to muffle clinks of metal. The infiltration team selected their gear carefully, light, quiet, easy to conceal. Catelyn struggled with the memory of the last time she had pinned her hopes on a cunning plan that involved trust and strategy. The Red Wedding. She forced herself to breathe and remember that these were not Freys under guest right. She was forging an attack, not walking into a false marriage feast. Still, anxiety gnawed at her. At last, the fateful morning arrived. Under a wan moon, the infiltration team approached Riverrun's southern flank by boat, hugging the river's edge. Catelyn was among them, seated low in a narrow skiff with Celia, Martin, and a few carefully chosen fighters who had proven their stealth. The Blackfish led another team around to a different angle, ready to launch a diversion. Fog clung to the water's surface, swirling around them in a shroud of gray. The castle's silhouette loomed ahead, walls rising black against the faint glow of an impending dawn. Her heart thudded as they navigated the currents. She saw the tall towers of Riverrun, the battlements where she had once walked with her father, the gatehouse that had welcomed her as a girl returning from the Eyrie. Now it bristled with Fry banners and men who wanted her dead. She clenched her jaw, steeling herself. This was no homecoming. This was war. A subtle splash alerted them that another boat approached from behind. A small contingent led by Jorgen, prepared to help secure any guard posts. The plan was for Celia and Martin to scale a side tower where they believed a friendly guard might let them in through a sally port. It was a gamble, relying on whispered loyalty. Meanwhile, Catelyn would circle toward the castle's rear courtyard, aiming for an old drainage tunnel that emptied into the river. She recalled slipping through that tunnel as a girl on a dare, giggling with Lisa. Now, if the phrase had left it only lightly guarded or neglected, it might be her path inside. They reached the bank in silence, tying the skiff to a half-submerged route. Clouds overhead threatened more snow, but for now only a biting wind scoured the water. Catelyn's breath misted as she slid into the mud, careful not to make a splash. Her boots sank an inch, cold water leaking in. She signaled for the others to fan out. With weapons sheathed, they crept forward. There, beneath the southern wall, the drainage tunnel yawned just above the waterline. Iron bars blocked most of the passage, but the scouts' earlier report suggested some bars were rusted through or possibly loose. The castle's caretakers had apparently grown lax, or simply had bigger concerns than an old waterway. Celia knelt beside Catelyn, gripping the bars. Quietly, she tested them. One came free with a soft groan of metal. Another soon followed, leaving a gap wide enough for a person to squeeze through if they turned sideways. Catelyn's heart hammered. This was it. She nodded, pressing forward into the tunnel. The cold stone walls pressed in on either side. Sludge and stale water soaked her boots. She led the way, guided only by a shuttered lantern that Martin held behind her, its light a dull glow. Each step echoed. She feared at any moment a guard above might hear them, or that they'd discover the path blocked further in. But they inched onward, the faint smell of mildew and rot filling her nostrils. At length, the tunnel slanted upward. The floor was slippery, coated in grime. She motioned for the others to wait while she peered through a narrow grating at the far end. By some miracle, the interior grate had been left unlocked or perhaps forcibly broken in the past. Beyond it, she glimpsed a dark corridor. She recognized it with a jolt. It led to the lower cellars near the old kitchens. She tried to steady her breathing. If they encountered guards now, a single shout could ruin everything. Slowly, she eased the grate open and stepped out into the corridor, sword in hand. It was deserted. Martin and Celia followed, then the rest, fanning out behind crates stacked against a wall. The corridor was lit by a single sputtering torch in a bracket, casting long shadows. Catelyn's pulse pounded in her ears. She was inside Riverrun again. A swirl of memories threatened to overwhelm her, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchens, the clang of her father's voice, the ripple of banners in the courtyard. She forced herself to focus. Edmure was somewhere above in captivity. Frymen roamed these halls. She had to act. She signaled to Celia and Martin, who split off with two others, heading toward the guard post near the kitchens. If they could quietly dispatch any Frymen there, it would secure a safe route. Catelyn and the rest would move deeper, searching for Edmure's cell or room. A captured servant's muttered account had suggested he was held in the main tower, in the solar that once belonged to Lord Hoster Tully. It was both irony and cruelty that they locked Edmure in his father's old chambers. With each step, they risked discovery. Echoing footsteps might draw attention. At one point, voices drifted from a side passage, two guards complaining about the night shift. The rebels froze, hearts racing. But the guards continued on without turning the corner, and the corridor fell silent again. They ascended a spiral staircase. The stone steps were worn smooth by generations of Tully feet. Catelyn's chest tightened to be here, creeping like a thief in her own ancestral home. At the next landing, a wide hallway stretched toward the main tower. A pair of Fry soldiers stood outside a heavy wooden door. One was yawning, the other stared idly at the wall. Catelyn motioned her companions behind an alcove. She studied the guards. They were battered male, swords at their hips, and seemed inattentive. If Edmure was locked behind that door, or if the door led to the solar, those guards had to be taken out quickly and quietly. A hush fell over the group. She signaled for one man, a skilled archer, to notch a short arrow. Another with a dagger volunteered to rush from the flank. They crept into position, heart-thudding. On Catelyn's nod, the archer loosed. His arrow struck one guard in the neck, snatching away his chance to scream. The second guard started to react, but Catelyn's man was on him in a flash, clamping a hand over his mouth and driving a dagger between his ribs. The guard let out a muffled groan and went limp. They lowered his body gently, trying to avoid a telltale thud. Catelyn hurried forward, stepping over the slain Freys. Her throat burned with hatred for those who had dishonored her family, but she kept it contained. No time for rage, only purpose. She pressed an ear to the door, hearing nothing inside. Carefully, she lifted the latch. It opened onto a small antechamber. No guards here, only more steps leading up, presumably to the solar. She whispered for two of her companions to guard the corridor, then she and another stepped inside. The antechamber smelled of old rushes and stale air. Lantern light glowed from above. She raised her sword, creeping up the steps. At the top, she found a half-open door. Through it, she could make out an ornate chamber. She recognized a tapestry on the wall, once depicting the Trident's victory, now partially torn. She swallowed a lump in her throat. This was indeed her father's solar. A single guard dozed in a chair by the door, a crossbow at his side. Beyond him, a figure lay on a bed or cot. The shape was lanky with auburn hair. Catelyn's breath caught. Edmure. She signaled her companion to remain silent, then stepped over the threshold. The guard stirred, blinking. Catelyn lunged before he could fully awaken, slamming the pommel of her sword into his temple. He let out a grunt and slumped sideways, crossbow clattering to the floor. Her companion rushed forward, seizing the man's arms, ensuring he wouldn't shout. Catelyn breathed hard, turning her eyes to the bed. Edmure lay there, pale and haggard, wrists bound by shackles. He wore a threadbare tunic, his face sunken with exhaustion. At the noise, he blinked blearily, squinting. When he saw Catelyn's face, confusion contorted his features, then disbelief. "Cat," he rasped. "Seven, is this a dream?" Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. She rushed to him, fumbling to free the iron shackles. "Edmure, it's me," she managed, voice shaking. "I've come back. I've come to get you out." He stared at her, then at the guard who lay unconscious. "Mother have mercy," he whispered. "I thought you were dead, Cat. They said you died at the Twins." "I did," she said, her voice thick. "But I couldn't rest, not while our home was in chains." She glanced around. "They've kept you chained here?" He nodded weakly, wincing as the shackles fell away. Bruises ringed his wrists. "They allowed me minimal freedoms under guard, using me to force the small folks' obedience. But their trust in me had waned. I tried to," he broke off, coughing. She rubbed his back gently, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Save your strength. We're going to get you out. Brynden is here, too, with men who still honor House Tully. The Freys won't hold Riverrun much longer if our plan works." Hope and disbelief warred in Edmure's eyes. "Brynden, alive." He let out a shaky laugh that quickly turned into another cough. Then he grimaced. "You must be careful. There are many Frey soldiers about, and some are on guard near the main gates." Catelyn helped him stand. He was unsteady, leaning on her shoulder. Her companion rummaged around, producing a short knife they'd taken from the guard's belt. Edmure accepted it with trembling fingers. He gave a small nod of thanks. They descended into the antechamber, rejoining the others. "We must move quickly now," Catelyn whispered. "The rest of our plan depends on us securing the gatehouse, or at least reaching the courtyard to signal Brynden's men." Footsteps echoed down the hall. The infiltration team tensed, weapons raised. Celia and Martin emerged from the shadows, accompanied by two more rebels. "Kitchens are handled," Celia panted. "A few Freys there, but we cut them down. The path to the courtyard is open for now." Some servants ran off screaming, though, so the alarm may spread soon. Catelyn's gaze shifted to Edmure, who stood with difficulty but nodded that he was ready. The group moved as one down the corridor, descending the spiral steps. At each landing, they braced for a rush of Frey soldiers. Shouts sounded in the distance, clearly something was amiss. By the time they reached the lower level, an alarm bell began to ring, sending clangs through the castle's corridors. "Move," Catelyn hissed, supporting Edmure's weight. They hurried through the passage leading to the main courtyard. Up ahead, the corridor opened onto a wide gateway. Two Frey men stood there, halberds in hand, scanning the darkness. Martin managed to shoot one in the throat before he could cry out. The other bellowed a warning and charged. Celia ducked his swing and hamstrung him. He fell with a scream that echoed off the walls. Now the alarm truly erupted. A wave of Frey guards poured in from the courtyard, steel flashing. Catelyn's rebels met them in a furious clash. Blades rang, sparks flew. Shouting men collided in a flurry of violence. Catelyn felt Edmure sag beside her, unable to fight. She pushed him behind a half-barred door for shelter, pressing the guard's crossbow into his shaking hands. "Stay safe," she gasped, then plunged into the melee. She parried a blow from a Frey soldier, her arms trembling from the impact. Another lunged at her from the side, forcing her to stumble back. Celia appeared, slashing the second soldier across the neck. Catelyn slashed at the first, who blocked, growling curses. Anger flared in her. She thrust low and felt her blade bite into flesh. He collapsed with a ragged gasp. They spilled out into the courtyard, where torches burned in brackets. Shouts echoed from the walls as more Freys rushed to repel the intruders. Catelyn glimpsed a cluster of them near the main gatehouse. If they could seize that gate and open it, the Blackfish's force waiting outside might flood in. She spied Martin leading a handful of rebels toward the gatehouse ladder, trying to fight their way up. Sparks flew. Blood streaked the stones. She saw a rebel fall, his head cleaved by a Frey axe. Another stabbed a Frey from behind. She herself nearly stumbled over a corpse, her balance saved only by Celia's steadying hand. Arrows whistled overhead. A chunk of stone broke away from a parapet. Catelyn realized the Blackfish's archers must be firing from beyond the walls, or perhaps from some vantage they had found. She let out a fierce breath. If they were here, the plan might yet succeed. "Up the steps," she called, pointing to a narrow stone staircase that wound to the top of the gatehouse. Celia and two others followed her. The steps were slick with blood, the air choked with smoke from overturned braziers. A Frey soldier barred their way halfway up. He and Catelyn exchanged blows that left her breathless. Celia darted around to flank him, planting a knife in his ribs. Gurgling, he tumbled down the stairs. They emerged onto the gatehouse platform. A small siege engine was mounted there, unmanned in the chaos. Two Frey archers whirled. Arrows knocked. One loosed an arrow that grazed Celia's arm. She hissed in pain but kept moving, throwing her dagger. It caught the archer square in the chest. The other archer fumbled to draw, but Catelyn lunged, driving her sword into his side. "Lower the drawbridge," she shouted. The mechanism was a large wooden crank. A single guard crouched behind it, eyes wide. He dropped his sword and raised his hands. One of the rebels pinned him to the wall at sword point while Celia and Catelyn turned the crank. Gears groaned. Chains rattled. Slowly, the drawbridge began to descend. Below in the courtyard, Frey soldiers saw what was happening. Some rushed for the gatehouse steps, howling to stop the rebels. Martin and his group intercepted them, steel clashing. Catelyn gave the crank another heave, ignoring the pain in her arms. The drawbridge slammed down with a boom, bridging the moat. A heartbeat later, horns sounded outside the walls. The Blackfish had been waiting for this moment. Suddenly, the thunder of hooves resounded, and the gate was forced open from outside, flooding the courtyard with Bryndon's men. They streamed in, shouting the Tully war cry. The Freys found themselves beset on two fronts: infiltration from within and cavalry from without. Confusion reigned. From her vantage on the gatehouse platform, Catelyn witnessed the swirl of battle below. The Blackfish, astride a dark horse, led a wedge of riders who cut down the panicked Freys. House Wayne's archers advanced, loosing arrows into the fray. Through the chaos, loyalists inside Riverrun, perhaps old Tully guards, turned on their Frey overseers. She heard them calling, "Tully! Tully!" The courtyard became a maelstrom of steel and blood. Catelyn wiped sweat and grime from her brow, scanning for Edmure. She spotted him sheltering near a column, kneeling behind a fallen beam. A Frey soldier advanced on him. Her heart lurched. She rushed down the steps, sword in hand, shouting a warning. But before she reached him, an arrow from above pierced the soldier's throat. The man collapsed. Edmure raised his head, blinking in disbelief, still clutching the crossbow. Relief weakened Catelyn's knees. As the rebels gained momentum, the Freys began to break. Some threw down their weapons, others fled deeper into the castle or scrambled for the battlements. By the time the sun's first rays broke over Riverrun's walls, the once-occupied fortress was in disarray. The Blackfish's cavalry ringed the courtyard. Stragglers were rounded up, disarmed. A ragged cheer went up from the rebels. The Tully banner, hidden by the phrase, was yanked from a storeroom and hoisted high once more. Its colors gleamed in the morning light, the leaping trout on red and blue. Catelyn knelt beside Edmure, helping him stand. He leaned on her heavily, but a weak grin touched his face. You truly came," he rasped. "I thought I was finished, Cat." She brushed a damp lock of hair from his forehead, tears mingling with sweat. "I would never abandon you, nor would our uncle." She glanced up as Brynden dismounted, hurrying over. The Blackfish grasped Edmure's hand, eyes bright with relief. For a moment, they were a family reunited among the smoking ruins of battle. Riverrun was theirs again, though the cost had been paid in blood. Catelyn surveyed the courtyard where corpses littered the flagstones, where rebels slumped in exhaustion or knelt by the wounded. Shouts and moans filled the air. Despite the carnage, she felt a rush of profound gratitude that she had lived to see this day. At Brynden's urging, they cleared the courtyard, moving the wounded to the Great Hall. Surviving Frey soldiers were disarmed and penned, many looking dazed and terrified. Some old servants emerged from hiding, tears of relief streaming down their faces at the sight of the Tully banner. They told stories of how the Freys had mistreated them. A few were so overcome that they simply sank to their knees, murmuring thanks. Catelyn helped Edmure into the solar, the same room where he had been imprisoned, now reclaimed. She found some key to his shackles, discarding them with quiet fury. Once, this chamber had been her father's place for receiving guests. Now it needed fumigation to purge the stench of Frey cruelty. She eased Edmure onto a chair, inspecting the bruises on his wrists. "We'll need a maester," she murmured, "or at least someone with skill in healing. This has to be seen to properly." He nodded, eyes filled with weariness. "Thank you, Cat. I still can't believe you're truly here. Alive." His gaze drifted to the scars on her throat. "But you've paid a heavy price, haven't you?" She swallowed. "Yes, we all have." Reaching out, she took his hand. "But Riverrun is free again. That's what matters now." A sudden motion at the door made them both look up. The Blackfish entered, face stern, but his posture betraying relief. He bowed his head. "Edmure, my lord, I trust you're well enough to give orders again." A pained chuckle escaped Edmure. "I might need a day or two, uncle, but yes. We must secure the castle. See if any of our old guard remains. There will be Frey reinforcements eventually. Walder Frey won't let Riverrun slip away without a fight." Brynden's mouth twisted in a grim smile. "Let them come. We'll hold these walls better than they ever could." He turned to Catelyn. "Niece, your leadership has rallied the Riverlands. The small folk speak of you as if you're a figure from the old songs, returned from death to avenge your kin. They call you the Lady of the Trident or the River Ghost." Catelyn flushed, remembering how she had once been only a wife and mother, content to watch her children grow. But that life was gone. Now she was something else, shaped by tragedy and an unyielding sense of duty. "Let them call me what they will," she said softly. "I just want to see our lands safe, free from Frey tyranny." "You may succeed," Brynden said, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. "But we'll need unity, and we'll need time to rebuild." Already, new rumors swirl. Some say the Lannisters are too consumed with their own troubles in King's Landing to intervene quickly. Walder Frey might not get the help he expects. Edmure nodded. "Then we must move swiftly, consolidate alliances. Let the houses of the Riverlands know that Riverrun once again stands under a Tully banner." Catelyn rose to her feet, looking out the window at the rising sun. Smoke drifted from the courtyard, but the sky beyond was streaked with gold and pale winter blue. A new day indeed. "We will send ravens," she declared. "We will call upon every ally who has ever bent the knee to House Tully, every loyal family outraged by the Red Wedding. Let them see that we can drive out the Freys. Let them come, and let us rebuild the Riverlands as it was meant to be." Her mind flickered to her children, scattered like seeds in the wind. One day, she promised herself, if she could secure this land, she would find them. She would see Sansa safe, find Arya if she still roamed the wilds, discover the truth about Bran and Rickon. And if all her children were lost, then at least she would make the Riverlands a place of justice for those who remained. A place where Walder Frey's evil legacy would be erased. Outside, A cheer went up as the Tully banner was hoisted fully atop Riverrun's highest tower, snapping proudly in the strengthening breeze. The sound of it, triumphant and raw, reverberated through the stones. Catelyn closed her eyes for a moment, letting the flood of emotions wash over her. Relief, sorrow, and a fierce determination that burned hotter than any flame. She had been Catelyn Stark. She had died at the Twins, and she had returned as something more, something that the Riverlands had needed in its darkest hour. Now she walked forward, out of the solar and down the stairs, to join the men and women who had fought for this victory, to console the wounded and begin the long task of rebuilding. As she passed through the corridors, the occasional cheer broke out, "Lady Tully! Lady of the Trident!" People stepped aside, bowing their heads or simply staring in awe. She accepted their thanks with a sober nod, feeling the weight of each expectant gaze. In the courtyard, Celia was binding a cut on her arm, surrounded by a group of battered but exhilarated rebels. Martin stood nearby, leaning on his sword as if it were a walking stick, grinning through a split lip. Edric helped a limping comrade to a stool, muttering encouragement. Jorgen wiped a smear of blood from his brow, half smiling as he caught sight of her. Dozens of others, some she knew by name, some she didn't, paused in their tasks to watch her. They looked to her for leadership, for hope. The hush that fell over them was charged with new beginnings. Catelyn cleared her throat, speaking loudly enough for all to hear. "This day belongs to all of us," she began, voice carrying despite its roughness. "You fought bravely, risked your lives to reclaim Riverrun. You've honored my father's memory and upheld the honor of House Tully. I thank you. My brother Edmure Tully thanks you. Ser Brynden Tully, our Blackfish, thanks you. Today, we have shown the phrase that justice cannot be drowned in blood." A ragged cheer went up. Some thrust their weapons skyward. Others simply let out long, tremulous shouts of triumph. She raised a hand for silence, continuing, "We must not grow complacent. Walder Frey will not sit idle. He will send more men, perhaps seek alliances with those who wish to crush our rebellion. We have much to do, walls to repair, wounded to heal, alliances to solidify. But let this victory guide us. Let it be a symbol to the Riverlands that we stand together and cannot be bowed by treachery." Another surge of cheers, this time louder, more confident. She felt her throat tighten, but she held herself steady. "Those who can fight will help guard these walls. Those who can heal will tend our wounded. Those who can bear arms and wish to join our cause will find a place here. The Riverlands has suffered enough. Let it be reborn under a banner of justice. House Tully may have lost much, but our spirit burns bright." She paused, letting the crowd sense the gravity of her words. Her gaze drifted over their upturned faces, hopeful, weary, scarred, resolute. She marveled at how her path had led here, from noble upbringing to marriage, from motherhood to the darkest pit of despair, and finally to this rebirth in battle. She was no shining knight or unstoppable warrior, yet she stood at the center of a movement that could reshape the fate of an entire region. Lowering her hand, she finished softly, "I am Catelyn Tully. I stand for the Riverlands. I stand for House Tully, and I swear to you, as long as I draw breath, no matter what shadows lie ahead, we will fight for our home. Together." The courtyard erupted in applause, a roar that bounced off the walls. Celia wiped a tear from her eye. Martin raised his sword in salute. Jorgen bowed his head, then yelled, "For House Tully!" The cry was taken up by dozens of voices, echoing over the battlements and out into the misty fields beyond. For a moment, the raw unity of that shout banished the chill of winter. Catelyn lifted her gaze to the sky, watching the Tully banner flap against the pale morning light. The fight for justice was far from over. Wars and struggles yet to come would test them all. But Riverrun was free, the Riverlands were stirring, and Walder Frey's shadow no longer fell unchallenged across this land. She drew in a breath, letting it fill her lungs. She thought of Ned, of Rob, of all she had lost and all she still might save. Then she steeled herself and turned toward the tasks awaiting her. Negotiations, fortifications, sending ravens, offering comfort to the grieving and wounded. The current of her life had swept her far from the woman she once was, but it had delivered her here, to this place of renewed purpose. And as she walked through the old familiar gate of Riverrun, hearing the cheering voices of her allies and seeing the silver trout fly proudly above, she allowed herself one moment of silent triumph. She had been born a Tully, died as a Stark, and come back to the land of her birth. Now, for as long as fate allowed, she would stand as the guardian of her father's house, the champion of the Riverland's forgotten sons and daughters, and the mother who would not yield to death itself in her pursuit of a better world. In the days that followed the retaking of Riverrun, Catelyn Tully found herself swept up in a current of urgent tasks that left her little time to reckon with the enormity of all that had transpired. Somewhere beneath the bustle, she was still the woman who had died in despair at the twins, but those memories, though unforgotten, no longer held her in thrall. She had a castle to secure, prisoners to judge, alliances to forge, and wounded to comfort. At the core of it all, she nurtured a fierce resolve to safeguard her brother Edmure, honor the memory of her lost children, and restore some measure of peace to the blood-soaked Riverlands. She rose before dawn each morning, stepping from the sparse bedchamber she'd commandeered, once an old scribe's room near the library, onto the cold stone corridors of Riverrun. Often she paused on the battlements to watch the sky shift from navy to pale gold. The Tully banner rose above her, snapping in the winter wind. She remembered her childhood wonder at these very battlements, how she would peer down at the moat swirling below, her father's comforting presence beside her, pointing out the watchful archers and the thick walls that had guarded their family for generations. Now she stood in command of those walls, a truth that sometimes unsettled her. She was no shield maiden born to fight, and yet here she was, leading others in a cause forged by necessity. Snow blew in through the arrow loops, dusting the floors in a thin, powdery veil that servants dutifully swept away. The crisp air stung her cheeks. She wore a thick cloak, pinned at the shoulder by a small silver trout, a relic she'd found in the castle's treasury, half forgotten. The silver had tarnished, yet she treasured it. Each morning she ran a fingertip over the etched details, quietly renewing her pledge to stand firm for House Tully and for every soul who looked to her with hope. She spent her first hours after sunrise in the main hall, conferring with Brynden the Blackfish and Edmure on the day's priorities. Edmure's health improved slowly. The bruises on his wrists were deep, his body weakened from captivity, but he refused to remain abed. His eyes still shone with gratitude whenever he glanced at his sister, as though he feared she might vanish like a dream. Brynden wore his usual guarded expression, but beneath it she sensed relief that his niece had returned to help carry the Tully name forward. Together, they planned how to strengthen Riverrun's garrison, ration their limited food supplies, and most crucially, decide what to do about their prisoners, the Fry soldiers who had been taken alive when the castle fell. These men, some 24 in number, ranged from seasoned knights to sullen footmen. They were now locked in a stable turnstockade while a few Tully loyalists stood guard. For days, the question of their fate simmered. Many among the Riverborn thirsted for revenge, citing how the Freys had butchered guests at the twins. Others advocated ransom. Still others, especially Edmure, insisted that an execution carried out in cold blood would taint their cause. Catelyn found her own feelings tangled. A part of her still burned with the memory of the Red Wedding, the crossbow bolts sinking into Robb, the knife slicing her own throat. Yet that same part warned her against becoming like Walder Frey. "We did not shed blood here merely to commit more atrocities," she said firmly one morning, addressing her gathered council, which included Celia, Jorgen, Martin, and several of the Riverborn captains. "House Tully stands for something more than brutality and vengeance. Justice must guide us, not blind wrath." Jorgen, bruised from the battle, shifted uneasily. "My lady, many of our folk lost everything to the Freys. Letting these prisoners live might strike them as weakness." Edmure, sitting in a wooden chair by the hearth, lowered his gaze. "All the same, we must not repeat the twins in reverse. Let the prisoners face proper judgment. If they swear to forgo House Frey and vow loyalty to the Riverlands, perhaps we can integrate some into our service. If they refuse, or if their crimes are too vile, we'll keep them locked away or arrange ransoms." Brynden grunted in agreement, though his tone remained terse. "We can't feed them indefinitely. We lack coin to ransom them all. A handful might convert to our cause, those pressed into service unwillingly. but many hold genuine loyalty to Walder Frey. We'd be fools to trust them. All the more reason to proceed carefully, Catelyn said. If we lose ourselves to cruelty, we sacrifice the righteousness of what we're trying to build. I won't let House Tully's legacy become that of wanton bloodshed. So they elected a small panel composed of Edmure, Celia, Martin, and 2 riverborn elders to question each prisoner. Past deeds were examined, allegiances tested. A few turned out to be common farmers pressed into Frey livery under threat. Others were dyed-in-the-wool Frey supporters who spat at the notion of switching sides. Some admitted to monstrous acts, looting, terrorizing villages, executing unarmed peasants. Catelyn listened to the testimony with a growing ache in her chest, balancing mercy against the need to protect her own people. In the end, the worst offenders were sentenced to remain in the dungeons until a formal resolution could be reached, likely a chance for Walder Frey to ransom them, or for them to face trial once stability returned. The smaller group who wished to atone or claimed innocence under coercion were set tasks around the castle under close supervision, mending roads, hauling supplies, cleaning latrines. None were simply turned loose. The arrangement satisfied few completely, but it quieted talk of wholesale executions. The Riverborn grumbled less when they saw that the prisoners were put to honest, punishing labor instead of sipping wine in comfortable cells. Over time, a handful of those once wearing Frey colors began to show genuine gratitude for not being strung up on the battlements. Some even assisted with repairs to Riverrun's outer walls, their sullen expressions melting into guarded respect for Lady Tully. The transformation was slow, but Catelyn considered every small shift in loyalty a victory. She believed such measures would plant seeds of trust across the Riverlands. News would spread that the Tullys dispensed more than raw vengeance. Amid these duties, Catelyn found moments to reconnect with her ancestral seat. She walked the castle's corridors, breathing in the familiarity of the old tapestries and the subtle trickle of water running through channels beneath the floors. The place had changed under Frey occupation. Some furnishings gone, certain chambers left in disrepair, the vibrant fish motifs chipped away in a few corners as though in petty defiance. She resolved to restore every last Tully symbol and tapestry. Let the Freys learn that they could not so easily eradicate her family's legacy. In a small courtyard near the kitchens, she discovered the remnants of a vegetable patch where she and Lisa had once hidden as girls, giggling about grown-up matters they didn't yet understand. The patch was now overrun by weeds. Catelyn knelt in the dirt, pulling up a scraggly plant, her throat tight at the memory of Lisa's face, so full of tears and resentments that had played out in the years that followed. She whispered a small prayer for her sister's soul, uncertain if it would find any divine ear. During one midday walk, she came upon Celia, who was tending a novice group of archers. Celia's arm bore a healing scar from the battle, but it hadn't slowed her. She patiently corrected their stances, urging them to aim steady and avoid snatching at the bowstring. When Celia noticed Catelyn, she waved the new archers away for a brief rest. "You're good at this," Catelyn observed, gesturing to the small band who fidgeted with their bows. Celia's eyes flickered with gratitude. They're eager to learn. Most are farmers' sons and used to anything but a hunting bow. Still, they want to fight for something, if only to avenge lost kin. Catelyn studied Celia's face. Lines of sorrow remained, but also a kind of resolute calm. "You've come far since we first met," she said quietly. "I'm grateful for your steady hand." A small, sad smile curved Celia's lips. "You gave me a reason to keep going, my lady. Before, I was just a widow with vengeance in my heart. Now, I fight for the Riverlands. It's bigger than my own pain, if that makes sense." "It does." Catelyn nodded. She felt a similar sense of larger purpose even as her personal griefs glowed like embers in her chest. "Keep training them. We'll need every arrow if the Freys gather their forces." Celia inclined her head. "I will, though I suspect winter storms will hamper any large campaigns for a while. The roads are growing treacherous." That was true enough. The snows, light at first, had begun to fall more steadily, dusting the Riverlands in a frozen hush. Supply lines grew precarious. Farmers huddled in their crofts, uncertain if they should sow the next season's seeds under the threat of renewed war. Catelyn spent hours meeting with local peasants who came seeking guidance. Should they flee west, deeper into Tully-held land, or remain on their farms and risk Frey raids? She tried to reassure them, offering small garrisons of archers to patrol vulnerable villages. but resources were stretched thin. Each day brought new pleas for help, new rumors of Frey outriders testing the edges of Tully influence. Her nights were no less demanding. Often, she drifted into a fractured sleep only to be jolted awake by nightmares of the red wedding, Rob's vacant eyes, the feel of cold steel crossing her throat. Sometimes she startled upright, her hand flying to her neck as though expecting to find blood. Yet her scars remained closed, her breathing ragged in the dim lamplight. She would lie awake then, counting heartbeats, wrestling with guilt at every choice that might have prevented that tragedy. Regret was a snare, one she tried not to let consume her. In those darkest moments, she found a calm center by reminding herself that she was here now, protecting Edmure and the Riverlands. She took small solace in the possibility that Sansa and Arya might still live. That faint hope kept her from drowning in despair. Perhaps once the Riverlands were secured, she could rally enough allies to rescue Sansa, find Arya, or at least learn their fates. Each day, that dream strengthened her resolve. As the weeks turned into the heart of winter, small victories and alliances began to mount. Several minor lords who had harbored grudges against the Freys for the Red Wedding or other slights came forward. House Blackwood sent a small contingent of men, black ravens emblazoned on their shields. Lady Amaris of House Wayne arrived with her archers and even offered some trained hunting hounds. Sir John Mosby from his tower continued to funnel supplies when he could, though he warned that Frey patrols had grown more vigilant. Beyond these direct alliances, messages arrived from scattered corners of the North and the Vale, some bearing half-truths of the ongoing war. Rumor had it that King's Landing was roiled by one crisis after another, the Lannisters stretched thin, the Tyrells wary, the Iron Throne overshadowed by internal strife. None of it was entirely reliable, but it hinted that Walder Frey might not have as much support as he hoped. That alone gave the Riverborn reason to remain confident. Still, no decisive clash with the Freys came. Catelyn suspected Walder Frey was biding his time, perhaps hoping that winter's hardships would erode the Tullis hold. It might also be that the old man underestimated them, convinced that his kin would hold the Riverlands eventually, that Riverrun would fail from within. But the rebels kept morale high, drilling daily, mending arrow fletchings, patrolling the roads. Whenever a Frey outrider band tried to raid a village, Tully scouts harried them in turn, picking them off with arrows. Word spread that the Riverlands were no longer easy prey. In late afternoon one day, Catelyn gathered with Brynden, Edmure, and a few other advisors in the solar that once belonged to her father. A fire crackled in the hearth, warding off the chill. Brynden stood by the window, gazing out at the snow-laden courtyard. Edmure sipped warm wine to soothe his throat, still not fully recovered. Martin and Celia stood near the map table where small wooden tokens represented allied houses. We've had a report that Walder Frey's nephew, Ser Ryman, was spotted mustering men at the crossroads in, Brynden said, his voice rough. They've been fortifying the roads there, possibly preparing an offensive come spring. Catelyn studied the map. The crossroads sat at a major junction linking the Vale, the Riverlands, and the North. If Frey soldiers entrenched themselves there, it would choke off trade and hamper any northern allies who might try to slip down and support the Tully cause. We can't let them solidify control, she said quietly. If we do, we'll be strangled. But we also can't just send our entire force to crush them. We'd leave Riverrun vulnerable. Edmure winced, gingerly setting down his cup. Perhaps we can send a modest company to harass Ser Ryman. Keep him from growing too strong, at least. Brynden tapped the table with a gloved finger. A feint, perhaps? We dispatch a small cavalry group to raid his outposts. Show that we won't allow him to hold the crossroads easily. Meanwhile, we maintain a strong defense here. Catelyn nodded. Yes, that might work. But we must ensure they're led by someone cunning. Ser Ryman's no brilliant strategist, but he'll have numbers. We can't afford to lose many men in a rash attack. All eyes shifted to Martin. He inclined his head. I'll do it, he said simply. I've scouted that region before. I know the back trails. Give me 20 riders and a handful of archers on horseback and I can keep them on edge without engaging in a pitched battle. Catelyn felt a swell of gratitude. Martin had proven himself resourceful and brave, if still young. She studied his earnest expression. Very well. But do not try to seize the inn outright, not yet. Disrupt them. Burn their supply wagons if you can. Remind the Freys that the Riverlands won't bow. Celia, arms folded, spoke up. I can join Martin. My archers are adept at moving swiftly. We'll do hit-and-run tactics, avoid direct confrontation unless the odds are in our favor. Brynden let out a half-smile. Good. The two of you handle it. Return within a fortnight or send word if something goes awry. His gaze turned to Catelyn. We can't neglect the possibility that the Freys will try something else in the meantime, like bribing or threatening our new allies into desertion. Catelyn rubbed her temples. Indeed. I'll write letters tonight to reaffirm our alliances. Offer them provisions or promises of shared spoils once we've secured the Riverlands. She glanced around the group. All of this rests on trust and mutual resentment of the Freys. We must keep stoking that flame until it burns bright enough to unite us all. Edmure nodded tiredly. House Tully has always believed in the strength of unity. Let's see it through. Within days, Celia and Martin led their detachment out through Riverrun's gates, hooves crunching on snow as they set off to harass Ser Ryman's forces. Catelyn watched them go with a mix of pride and worry. The winter sky hung low and gray, threatening more snow. She prayed they would not ride into a blizzard unprepared. Yet she trusted Celia's level head and Martin's adaptability. She stood on the walls until the small column was out of sight, then turned back to the castle, setting her jaw against the winter wind. A week passed in uneasy calm. The fortress grew quieter without Celia's archers at their usual drills. Some inhabitants worried about every rumor of Frey sightings. Others sought ways to beat the boredom of winter nights, hosting small gatherings by the hearth where minstrels, the few they had, would pluck strings and sing old ballads. Catelyn sometimes listened from a corner, half lost in her thoughts. Music brought her fleeting comfort, although certain tunes reminded her of happier days in Winterfell, days she could never reclaim. Still, she tried to show a gracious face, letting the people see her presence as a reminder that House Tully endured. Edmure proved more engaged than ever, walking the castle grounds to speak with guards, sharing modest jokes, and ensuring that rations were fairly distributed. He possessed a gentler touch than she did, an easy smile that put anxious souls at ease. Catelyn's own bearing, shaped by heartbreak and resurrection, was more severe, though the men and women of Riverrun found reassurance in her steadfast purpose. Brynden oversaw defenses and scouted out potential weak points in the walls, muttering that they needed to store more pitch if a siege ever came. He also spoke of mustering a band to ride north in the spring, perhaps to see if any loyal Northmen might join their cause once the snows began to thaw. Catelyn didn't let her hope run wild at the thought. Too many uncertainties lay ahead. But she did dream, sometimes, of reuniting with those who still held Ned Stark's memory dear. Almost 2 weeks after Celia and Martin's departure, a single rider galloped into Riverrun's courtyard at dusk, horse lathered with sweat despite the frigid air. Catelyn, alerted by watchmen, hurried down to meet him, her heart hammering. She feared a disaster or news that Ser Ryman had overwhelmed their small force. The rider, a young man with mud-splattered cloak, nearly fell from the saddle as she approached, grabbing her arm for support. "My lady," he gasped, eyes wide. "Ser Martin sends word. They harried the Freys, but reinforcements came from the south, more than we expected. We lost a few, but we've managed to hold them near the old orchard along the river road. Ser Martin and Celia ask for aid if we can spare it. They say Ser Ryman's men might break free soon and regroup or try to outflank them." Catelyn's pulse quickened. She ushered the rider to a bench near a brazier. "You've done well. Warm yourself. I'll speak to Lord Edmure and Ser Brynden." She glanced at the gatehouse, night falling swiftly. "Is Ser Martin still out there, pinned down?" "Yes, my lady," he choked out, blinking against the fire's glow. "They've set up a temporary camp in the orchard. We're winning small skirmishes, but we can't maintain it if Ser Ryman brings more men. He already has double our numbers." Catelyn thanked him and summoned Brynden, who emerged from the hall with a soldier's brisk stride. Edmure joined them shortly after, leaning on a cane. He had taken a fall in the snow the day before, bruising his hip. The three conferred, hush-voiced. "We can't let Martin and Celia be overrun," Brynden said. "But we also can't empty Riverrun's garrison. How many men can we spare?" Edmure asked, a frown creasing his brow. Catelyn considered swiftly. "Let's send another 20 riders, along with 10 archers on foot, lightly equipped so they can move fast. If Ser Ryman is building momentum, it's better to crush him now than wait until he gathers a full host." Brynden nodded curtly. "I'll lead them myself if you don't object. My name alone might stiffen the rebels' morale. And I know the Orchard region, there are old fieldworks from the last war we can use." Catelyn felt relief. The Blackfish was a seasoned commander. If anyone could salvage the situation, it was he. "Go quickly then, and be cautious," she said. "We can't afford to lose you." He smirked wryly. "I'm too stubborn to die. Keep Riverrun safe in my absence." Turning to Edmure, he clasped his nephew's arm. "Rest that hip. You're no good to us limping around in a fight." Edmure scowled but sighed. "Fine. Bring our people home." Within an hour, Brynden and his company thundered out the gates, torches flaring against the night sky. Catelyn stood atop the ramparts, watching the line of flickering lights snake away. The wind bit at her cheeks, and an uneasy tension coiled in her gut. She could almost feel the riverlands trembling, poised between grudging peace and sudden bloodshed. War in winter was a harsh gamble. Men froze in the saddle, horses starved when foraging. Yet the Freys were forcing their hand, refusing to let them consolidate their gains. She slept little that night, pacing the solar floor with a cloak around her shoulders. The faint glow of banked coals flickered in the fireplace. Outside, the wind keened. She paused at intervals to stroke the silver trout pin on her cloak, recalling her father's unwavering calm in a crisis. She tried to summon that calm now, but her heart twisted with worry for those riding into danger. Daylight brought no immediate news. She busied herself with tasks, inspecting the fortress, signing orders for more supply runs, listening to the petitions of local folk who trudged through the snow to beg assistance. But her mind stayed on the orchard, on Martin and Celia, on Bryndon's rescue. Over the next 2 days, she found herself glancing constantly at the road, hoping to see returning riders. Her own reflection in the frozen moat sometimes startled her. She wore the look of a woman caught between hope and dread. Early on the third morning, horns blared from the watchtowers. She rushed out onto the walls, breath steaming, to see a long column approaching. At first, her pulse spiked with fear that it might be a Frey host. But then she spotted Bryndon's distinctive banners near the front, a black fish on red. Her heart soared. Another banner flew behind him, the Tully Trout. And behind that, disorganized lines of men who might be prisoners or newly allied forces. It was difficult to tell from a distance. "Open the gates," she called down, voice carrying in the crisp air. The gatehouse rattled as the chains lifted the portcullis. Catelyn descended rapidly, nearly slipping on the steps in her haste. In the courtyard, men and women gathered, anxious to learn the outcome. The Blackfish rode in at the head of his company, snow clinging to his cloak, face set with grim satisfaction. Celia rode beside him, blood seeping through a bandage on her left arm, but upright and alert. Martin trailed behind, his cheek bruised but eyes bright. At the rear came a ragged cluster of riders and footmen, some wearing Frey colors torn or soiled. They were clearly captives. A handful of wounded men were carried on stretchers, both Tully and Frey. Snow slush dripped off the horses, forming pink-tinged puddles in the courtyard. Catelyn stepped forward, relief spilling over her features. "Uncle, you've returned safely. What word?" Bryndon dismounted stiffly, handing his reins to a stable boy. "Ser Ryman's lines have been scattered. We found Martin and Celia locked in skirmishes, outnumbered but holding their ground. With our reinforcements, we turned the tide. Ser Ryman fled south with a handful of cronies. He left many behind, dead, wounded, or surrendered. Martin slid off his horse, grimacing. Ser Ryman nearly cornered us, but we used the orchard trenches to funnel his cavalry into a bottleneck. We were able to repel them. After that, they broke." Celia, cradling her injured arm, added quietly, "We captured about a dozen. Some threw down weapons rather than fight. We lost a few of our own, though, good men who couldn't be saved." Catelyn's elation was tempered by the mention of the fallen. She nodded solemnly. "We'll honor those we lost. You've done well. All of you." A stir in the ranks made her turn. A young Frey captive had spat on the ground, his face contorted with fury. One of Bryndon's men cuffed him, silencing whatever curse he was about to utter. Another prisoner glared at Catelyn with hatred, his lip bloodied. Clearly, not all were prepared to yield. Catelyn drew herself up, letting a firm note enter her voice. "Bring them to the stockade. We'll question them. Any wounded, see they're tended. We are not the twins. We don't slaughter the helpless." Several of her soldiers nodded and set about escorting the captives away. Bryndon offered Catelyn a thin smile, though his eyes bore exhaustion. "A victory, niece, but we mustn't grow overconfident. Ryman might try again, or Walder Frey might send a larger force in spring." She reached out, squeezing his arm. "Thank you for leading the rescue. This shows the Freys they can't simply snuff us out wherever they please." He grunted in agreement, then turned to address the returning riders, praising their courage and instructing them to take rest and hot meals. Celia and Martin limped off to find a healer, both protesting that their wounds were minor but not refusing the help. Before departing, Celia cast Catelyn a weary grin, relief at surviving etched in her expression. Catelyn felt a pang of gratitude for them both, these young leaders who had risen from the chaos to stand at her side. That night, Riverrun's halls echoed with subdued celebration, as men and women recounted their brushes with death over bowls of hearty stew. A cask of half-decent wine was opened, though the mood remained respectful toward those who hadn't returned. Names of the fallen were spoken with quiet reverence. Catelyn circulated among the crowd in the great hall, listening to stories of bravery, placing a gentle hand on shoulders bowed by grief. She was no queen, but in that moment she felt a queen's burden, to console, to honor, and to lead. When she finally retired to her chamber, the corridor outside lay silent. She sank onto a small stool by the hearth, letting the day's tension seep from her limbs. Winter winds howled beyond the walls, swirling snow across the battlements. She stared at the flickering shadows and thought of the child she had once been, scurrying through these same corridors, hair in ribbons. The child who had never imagined bloodshed like this. A single tear traced down her cheek before she rubbed it away. The red wedding might haunt her forever, but that tragedy no longer defined her every step. She was forging a new path for the Riverlands, for House Tully, and for the memory of all she had lost. The notion gave her a strange resilience. Yes, she had died once, but she had a purpose now that even death had not shattered. Despite the frigid nights, the weeks that followed saw an unusual lull in major conflict. Snow blanketed the roads, making large-scale troop movements difficult. The Freys, it seemed, were content to lick their wounds rather than mount further offensives in the dead of winter. Catelyn seized the respite to strengthen relationships with the minor houses that had joined them. Edmure corresponded with House Blackwood, hinting at a future gathering of Riverlords once travel became feasible again. Brynden oversaw the forging of new weapons, ensuring the blacksmiths had steady supplies of iron. During this time, messengers slipped in and out of Riverrun, some carrying news of events beyond the Riverlands. Whispers reached them of turmoil in King's Landing, machinations among the nobles, rumors of dragons overseas, talk of further rebellion stirring. Catelyn weighed each rumor carefully, gleaning which might be relevant. If the Lannisters were indeed weakened, that might keep them from sending help to Walder Frey. But it also meant chaos in the realm, an environment where old grudges could flare. Late one evening, a messenger arrived bearing letters from the north. Catelyn's hands trembled as she received the parchment. She retreated to a quiet corner of the solar to read them, heart hammering with both fear and longing. The seal was unfamiliar, a rough impression of a dire wolf, perhaps, but not the official Stark sigil. The text inside was brief, cryptic. To Lady Catelyn of House Tully, also known as Lady Stark, word of your survival and recapture of Riverrun has reached me. I am not certain if you are truly returned, but if so, know that the North remembers. Winterfell is not what it was, yet pockets of loyal men and women remain. There are whispers of your children's fate. A man claims to have seen Arya Stark traveling disguised, though details are scarce. Another rumor places Rickon Stark somewhere in the far north. These might be lies or illusions, but I share them because I believe you should know. The realm is in flux, but the bonds of the North are not easily broken. Should the time come for the Starks and Tullys to stand together, we will. Pray the snows melt soon. No signature, just that note and a small drawing of a weirwood tree. Catelyn stared at the lines, tears pricking her eyes. The mention of Rickon stung. She had been so sure he was dead, or at least she had been told he was. Arya, too, had been spotted so many times in so many places that she had never known which rumor to believe. But just seeing the names of her children in ink forwarded by some unknown ally made her heart lurch. She set the letter aside, shutting her eyes. A swirl of emotions rose, hope, dread, a fierce protective urge. If her children lived, what kind of dangers were they facing? Who was looking out for them? Each rumor could be a trap, a deception planted by enemies. Or it could be the faintest spark of truth. She felt the old conflict tear at her again, to abandon the Riverlands in search of her children or to remain and secure the territory she had bled to reclaim. She could not do both. She could not be in two places at once. A soft knock on the door made her open her eyes. It was Edmure hobbling in with his cane. You look troubled, sister, he said gently, glancing at the letter. She handed it to him in silence. He read the words, lips thinning. Could it be true? She drew a shaky breath. I don't know. I've heard so many conflicting tales of Arya. As for Rickon, it was said Theon Greyjoy killed him at Winterfell or that Ramsay Bolton did. Now there's a rumor he lives. But the North is vast and perilous, especially in winter. Edmure laid a hand on her shoulder. If they do live, they're hardy, like Ned's blood. The Starks endure. But what will you do? She swallowed the lump in her throat. I must remain here for now. House Tully can't risk falling back into Frey hands. The people depend on us. If I leave, I weaken everything we've built. Yet if the chance arises, if the snow's clear enough for travel, I might consider sending an envoy north or going myself if the situation allows." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I know it weighs on you, but you've done so much already. The Riverlands needs you." A pang of guilt struck her. She wanted to rush out that very moment to find her children, but the thought of Riverrun undone, Edmure recaptured, or worse, was unbearable. She touched her brother's arm. "Yes, we continue as we must. But keep this letter secret for now. Let's not spur rumors. Wait until we have more information." With a last glance at the words scrawled on the parchment, she tucked it into her cloak. That night, she kept the letter near her pillow as though it were a talisman that might lead her to the truth. Her dreams were filled with fleeting images of Arya, barefoot and scrappy, and Rickon clutching Shaggy Dog's black fur. She saw them both beckoning to her across an icy lake, their voices muffled by the wind. When she tried to run to them, the ice cracked beneath her feet. Winter deepened. Icicles clung to Riverrun's ramparts and the moat froze in places. Yet the castle hummed with a determined industry and undercurrent of resilience coursing through halls warmed by hearth fires. Ravens flew daily to potential allies, carrying messages sealed with the Tully sigil. Sometimes they returned with polite but evasive replies. Other houses were reluctant to commit until spring. Others promised open support if Walder Frey made a push. The snows made it difficult for armies to march, but also for farmers to transport goods. Everyone was forced to wait, bracing for what the thaw might bring. One bleak dawn, Catelyn found herself in the courtyard, watching the stable hands feed the horses. The sky was a slate-gray dome. She drew her cloak tighter, thinking how quiet the world felt in winter's grip. Then a cry from the gate startled her. She turned to see a pair of riders half-covered in frost, cantering toward the keep. At first, she thought they might be more messengers, but as they drew closer, she recognized the older man at the front. It was Jörgen, one of her earliest allies, the bearded fighter who had helped resurrect her. Riding behind him was a younger figure swathed in a bulky cloak. "My lady," Jörgen called out, dismounting stiffly. "I come from the hills west of here. We've discovered a band of refugees traveling under the banner of House Tully. They claim to be villagers who fled from Frey oppression. Among them is a woman who insists on speaking with you personally. Says her news is urgent." Catelyn blinked, scanning the yard. She did not see any large group of refugees. "Where are they?" "Camped a league away in the old orchard near the ferry crossing." Jürgen's breath steamed. "I rode ahead to warn you. The woman, she says she has knowledge of something that might change our fortunes." Without further delay, Catelyn ordered a small party to ride out and escort the refugees in. Edmure wanted to come, but his hip still bothered him in the cold, so he relented. Brynden was out hunting with a small group, hoping to replenish their meat stores. Thus, Catelyn led a squad of 10 riders, Jürgen at her side, through drifted snow. The day was bitterly cold, wind scouring their faces, but she pressed on, spurred by curiosity and concern. When they reached the orchard, she found a ragtag assemblage huddled around a feeble fire. Perhaps 30 or 40 souls, old men, women with children clinging to them, a handful of younger folk with worry carved into their eyes. They looked half-starved, their clothes tattered. A few mules stood behind them, laden with bundles. As Catelyn and her riders approached, one woman rose from the group, dropping her hood to reveal a lined face and graying hair. Catelyn dismounted, scanning the woman's features. "I am Catelyn Tully. Jürgen tells me you've come seeking refuge and that you carry important news." The woman nodded, swallowing hard. Her voice was reedy but firm with desperation. "Yes, my lady. I'm called Hara. We hail from a village near Fairmarket, or what's left of it." The phrase came through, demanding taxes and levies we couldn't pay. They took what they wanted, burned parts of the village. "We fled. But there is more. My lady, I bring word of a secret gathering of Frey allies. They plan something large when the snows melt. I overheard them speak of it." Catelyn's pulse quickened. She reached out, clasping the woman's hand gently. "Slowly, Hara. Tell me everything." Hara took a trembling breath, glancing at the other refugees. "We sheltered in the woods to hide from a Frey patrol. They set up camp near us without knowing we were there. I heard their captains talking one night. They said the Freys had struck a deal with Sellsword companies. At least 2 groups from Essos, they said, men hardened by war across the narrow sea. The plan is to bring them to the Riverlands as soon as the roads clear. They want to crush Riverrun before summer." A chill coursed through Catelyn, deeper than the winter wind. If the Freys hired foreign Sellswords en masse, it would tip the balance. The Riverborn couldn't match that kind of professional force easily. "Did you hear anything of how many Sellswords?" Hara shook her head. "Numbers I can't say. But they boasted it would be hundreds, maybe thousands. Enough to end the Tully pretenders once and for all. My lady, I couldn't stay silent. We left everything behind to bring you warning. Catelyn believed the sincerity in her eyes. She squeezed Hara's hand. You did right coming here. You're safe now. We'll arrange shelter for all of you at Riverrun. As her riders helped the refugees gather their few belongings and prepare to move, Catelyn stared at the bleak horizon. So Walder Frey was mustering Sellswords for a massive spring offensive. That meant a true war might ignite once the thaw began. She had dreaded such a confrontation, hoping the Freys would be unable to muster large support. But if they used their gold or Lannister gold to hire ruthless mercenaries, the Riverlands would face a tide of professional killers. Even with her alliances, even with the Blackfish's skill, victory was far from certain. Yet there was no turning aside now. She would meet whatever storm Walder Frey unleashed. If he thought to drown them in blood a second time, he would learn that House Tully did not die so easily. She lifted her chin, breathing in the icy air until her lungs burned. They had time, if only a few months, to prepare. She would gather the River Lords, fortify Riverrun, and call upon every friend she'd made. She would not let the Riverlands suffer another massacre at the Twins. They returned to Riverrun as dusk settled, guiding the refugees through the gate. Servants bustled to find them space near the kitchens, offering broth and blankets. Hara thanked Catelyn repeatedly, tears bright in her eyes, as though she could hardly believe their good fortune after so much hardship. Inside the castle's hall, Catelyn conferred with Edmure. He listened gravely to the news, face paling. Thousands of Sellswords? That's no rumor to ignore. No, she agreed, pacing before the hearth. We must act. We must rally every house that holds a grudge against the Freys. We must also seek new allies beyond the Riverlands if possible. The Tyrells, the Dornish, any who might share our dislike of the Lannisters and Freys. Edmure drummed his fingers on the arm of his chair. And if they won't come to our aid? She stopped pacing, resting a hand on the mantle. Then we stand alone. But we stand. Walder Frey has shown no mercy, so we cannot afford illusions. We will make a bastion of Riverrun. The Blackfish will lead field operations, wearing down their hired swords with guerrilla tactics if we must. And when the final battle comes, we will face it on ground of our choosing. His mouth set in a determined line. We'll need more food, more arms, more everything. The smallfolk can't bear another wave of destruction. She gazed into the flames, remembering a time when she believed in the simple power of honor. We'll protect them as best we can. We'll show them that House Tully does not forsake its own. If we stand firm, maybe others will join. Maybe we can break the Frey menace once and for all. The following days saw a flurry of preparations. Ravens flapped away in a steady stream, letters sealed with the Tully trout entreating every corner of the realm for support. Some ravens carried clandestine messages to loyalists in King's Landing or even to the Vale, hoping that old alliances might be rekindled now that the Lannisters' grip seemed tenuous. The Blackfish, when he returned from hunting, listened to Hara's story with a dark scowl, then immediately began organizing scouts to watch for any sign of Sellsword ships arriving. Meanwhile, Edmure took stock of their grain stores, while Celia helped train more archers, teaching them to loose arrows quickly and accurately from the battlements. Through it all, Catelyn steeled herself. The memory of the Red Wedding remained a warning in her mind. Complacency could be fatal. She pushed for discipline among her troops and kindness toward those in need. She wanted no whiff of brutality or injustice tarnishing their cause. The Riverlands had endured too many knights who acted like brigands. Her forces would be better, or they would lose their moral advantage. Winter's icy hold gradually loosened. By the time the snows began to melt, the roads were slick with mud, the air damp and raw. Riverrun's moat ran swift and cold, fed by snowmelt from the surrounding hills. Scouts reported that certain Frey outposts stirred with new arrivals. Mercenaries dressed in mismatched leather, speaking foreign tongues. Some with half-shaved heads or strange tattoos, the hallmarks of Sellsword companies from the free cities. At night, the lights of enemy camps glowed on distant ridges. In response, the keep bustled like a hive. New shipments of arrows arrived from local Fletchers. Women and older men shaped boiling pitch in great cauldrons, storing it in barrels for a possible siege. Carpenters reinforced gates. Even the local smallfolk contributed what they could. Scythes, pitchforks, sharpened stakes. For if the Freys came in overwhelming force, every last hand might be needed. The letters Edmure had sent out garnered mixed replies. A few smaller houses swore to send men, but major powers remained guarded, unwilling to commit until they saw a clearer outcome. Yet a faint glimmer of hope came from an unexpected quarter. A raven arrived from the Eyrie, bearing a polite message of support from Lord Robert Arryn's regent. Though the Vale had largely stayed out of the War of the Five Kings, the letter hinted that the injury done to House Tully would not be forgotten. It was a far cry from a vow to march armies, but it indicated that the Vale might not side with the Freys, and that, in itself, was something. On a chilly morning thick with fog, the Blackfish summoned Catelyn to the ramparts. He stood near a crenellation, scanning the horizon with a spyglass. The road leading north lay visible in a patch of clearing mist. Distant shapes were moving across it. A column of armed men, some mounted, some on foot. Catelyn took the spyglass, squinting to get a better view. She saw battered banners that she recognized with a jolt. The boar of House Crakehall, the golden lion of House Lannister, both muddy and tattered. Her pulse spiked. Lannisters? Here. Bryndon's expression twisted. A small force, 50 men perhaps, could be a splinter group. They seemed to be heading this way. What do they want? She murmured. If the Lannisters come as enemies. Wait. Bryndon lifted a hand, signaling for quiet. See that white cloth on a spear's tip? They ride under a flag of truce. Catelyn lowered the spyglass, mind racing. A parley, perhaps. They might be seeking to negotiate on the Frey's behalf, or gather intelligence. Bryndon offered a dry grunt. We can't ignore them, but we greet them on our terms. Let them speak from outside bow range of the walls. Swiftly, they organized a small reception party within Riverrun's gatehouse. Men with crossbows lined the walls, ready to loose if the Lannister group attempted any trickery. Catelyn and Bryndon stood on the parapet above the gate, faces hidden behind the stone merlons. They watched as the column approached. At its head rode a stocky knight in Lannister livery, a half-cracked lion's sigil on his breastplate. When they halted 100 paces from the moat, the knight raised his visor, calling out in a carrying voice, I am Ser Flemont Brax, sworn man to House Lannister. I request safe conduct to speak with Lady Catelyn Tully on matters of armistice. The name Brax stirred faint memory for Catelyn. House Brax was sworn to the Lannisters, lesser known but loyal. The phrase matters of armistice sounded too grand to be a simple envoy. She exchanged a glance with Bryndon. He shrugged, expression skeptical. Catelyn stepped forward on the parapet. Ser Flemont Brax, you ride beneath the truce banner, so we will hear you. But know this, any treachery, and your men die swiftly. Is that understood? Ser Flemont dipped his head. Understood, my lady. We come in peace, with words from Casterly Rock. Casterly Rock, seat of House Lannister. Interesting. Catelyn turned to a guard. Lower the drawbridge halfway. Let him come alone on foot. His men stay put. Keep archers ready. The guard relayed her orders. Moments later, the drawbridge groaned, descending partway. Ser Flemont dismounted, walked carefully across the lowered section, and stopped on the far side of the moat as the bridge halted, leaving a gap he could not easily cross without. Plank. He removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face, hair flecked with gray, sweat beading his temples. Catelyn stood on the rampart above him, flanked by Bryndon and 2 crossbowmen. Speak your piece, Ser Flemont, she called down. He cleared his throat, voice echoing. My lady, I bring greetings from the Lady Regent of the Rock, Cersei Lannister herself. She extends an offer to treat with House Tully. A settlement, if you will. The Lannisters have no wish for further bloodshed in the Riverlands, provided Walder Frey's rights are recognized and your rebellion ceases. In exchange, certain concessions can be made. Catelyn's lips parted in a grim half-smile. Concessions? House Frey murdered my family under guest right. Do you think a few trinkets will wash away that treachery? Ser Flemont spread his hands. Walder Frey is favored by the crown, my lady. But the crown is, shall we say, occupied with other concerns. The realm bleeds from many sides. We propose an arrangement. You bend the knee to King Tommen, you acknowledge Frey authority over certain lands, and in return, your life and Edmure Tully's are spared. The Riverlands remain nominally under Tully oversight, but as vassals to Lord Fry. A low hiss of anger escaped her. Bryndon's hand twitched on his sword hilt. You dare come here with demands that we kneel to the very man who betrayed us? She said coldly. Ser Flemont pressed on, face tightening. This is the price of peace. House Lannister does not seek to send large armies this way, not with winter and other troubles abounding. But if forced, we will. And if we come, not even your precious Riverrun will be safe. Think carefully, Lady Catelyn. Accepting these terms spares thousands of lives. Deny them, and more war is certain. A hush fell, the courtyard behind Catelyn seething with tension. She pictured Walder Frey's smug grin if she surrendered Riverrun. A wave of revulsion washed over her. She recalled the letter she'd received about the Sellswords. Was this part of a coordinated push? Cersei hoping to break their spirit before the Freys unleashed fresh forces? Brynden spoke next, voice dripping disdain. Go back and tell your Lady Regent that the Tullys do not forget or forgive slaughter under guest right. We will not bow to Walder Frey. Ser Flemont glared upward. Then you condemn the Riverlands to more bloodshed. Catelyn's heart thundered. She wanted to fling curses at the Lannisters. Instead, she reined in her rage, maintaining a facade of composure. Ser Flemont, your courtesy in delivering this message is noted, but we will not submit. If the crown truly wishes to avoid bloodshed, let them demand the Freys atone for the Red Wedding. We accept no arrangement that rewards murder. His cheeks flushed. Then my mission is in vain, but I will report your words. I urge you to reconsider. War will be upon you soon enough. She straightened, voice ringing. We are well aware. Now go, and take your men from our gates. Ser Flemont swallowed. I shall. He replaced his helmet. May the gods show mercy where men cannot. They raised the drawbridge enough for him to depart the way he came. Catelyn watched until he reached his waiting men. The column turned, spurring their horses back along the road. Only once they vanished into the mist did she exhale, fury and trepidation mingling in her breast. Brynden laid a hand on her shoulder. You gave him the only answer possible. She nodded, though a part of her wondered if the realm was too shattered for ideals. Would more innocents die because she refused to yield? Then she remembered the haunting image of Robb's lifeless body and the savage grin on Walder Frey's face. No, she would never bow to that. Better to stand and fight. Better to trust that justice still had a place in this cruel world. The next days were a blur of warlike preparation, each morning bringing fresh rumors, Frey mustering in the east, Sellsword sightings in the south, Lannisters uncertain. Catelyn steeled the hearts of her people with open displays of determination, ordering more arrow slits reinforced, ensuring their siege supplies were inventoried. She and Edmure drafted proclamations inviting the River Lords to gather at Riverrun come spring for a final council of war. They would not wait for the enemy to choose the battlefield. If the Freys and Lannisters believed House Tully would fold, they would learn otherwise. Still, the strain on her weighed heavily. She seldom smiled, and her nights brought little rest. She took to wandering the battlements late, gazing at the dark silhouettes of farmland that had once been peaceful, remembering simpler nights in the north with Ned. She yearned to see her daughters, to hold them and know they were safe, but that dream seemed far away. Duty demanded everything she had. One moonlit evening she passed Celia on the walls. Celia stood alone, looking out over the moat. She seemed lost in thought, face drawn. Catelyn halted, hearing the hush of the wind. Are you all right? She asked gently. Celia nodded, though her eyes glistened. Just thinking of my husband. How he died at the Twins. I still see his face in every victory we earn, every plan we make. I wonder if he'd be proud of what I'm doing. Catelyn placed a hand on her shoulder. He would be. You've become a leader, Celia. You fight for more than just vengeance, you fight to protect the Riverlands. A tear slid down Celia's cheek. Sometimes I'm terrified, my lady. Terrified of the next battle, terrified that we'll fail. But I can't stop. Catelyn's own throat tightened. Nor can I. Fear is what reminds us to be careful. We press on because we must. The Riverlands needs us. Celia nodded, turning to gaze across the moonlit water. Thank you for understanding. They stood together for a time, two women shaped by loss, forging courage in the stillness of night. When at last they parted, Catelyn returned to her chamber, heart heavy yet steadied by the knowledge that she was not alone. Others carried grief, Others shared her determination. That unity, fragile though it was, might be their greatest shield against the storms gathering on the horizon. Thus the winter gave way to the slow thaw of early spring, the riverlands stirring under a watery sun. The roads became mud rather than ice, the streams swelled with meltwater. People began emerging from their winter shelters, warily planting seeds, though fear of conflict still gripped them. Ravaged villages tried to rebuild. Through it all, Catelyn Tully and her allies held Riverrun, refusing to bend to Walder Frey's demands. She had been resurrected by dark miracles, survived heartbreak and betrayal, and now stood at the heart of a rebellion that might reshape the land she once called home. No matter what storms arrived, no matter what Sellsword hordes or Lannister threats, she would face them head-on. Her once gentle heart had been reforged into something unbreakable. In her quiet moments, she thought of Ned, of Robb, of all her children, dead or lost. She prayed that the gods might grant her strength to finish what she had begun, that the Riverlands would never again bow to butchery, that the Freys would at last answer for their crimes, and that in victory, perhaps, she could find the means to search for her scattered children. Until then, she stood resolute behind the ramparts of Riverrun, cloak snapping in the wind, scars on her throat marking the price she had paid. The banner of the leaping trout flew beside her, and the gathered men and women who called her Lady Tully knew that neither steel nor betrayal had quenched her spirit. Whatever trials waited beyond the horizon, Catelyn Tully would meet them, unyielding, unwavering, with the fierce love of a mother who had defied even death. And in the hush before the storm, as crows wheeled over the thawing fields, the Riverlands drew breath, waiting for the final reckoning that would decide its fate.